Chapter 2789. Since the green fog had dissipated, the man in white had naturally removed the light shield around him. He was originally standing on a big rock with his clothes fluttering in the wind. His expression, and even his movements were like that of an elegant young master. However, Rongyu Ishinlan's words seemed to have directly pierced through his painted skin, and he almost jumped up on the spot. His snow-white handsome face turned green and white, and in that instant, he lost all his elegance. "You're courting death." He crossed his palms and pounced on Rongyu Ishinlan. At this time, Rongyu Ishinlan chuckled and said, "Are you angry from embarrassment? You have to know that some people don't look like an emperor even when they wear a dragon robe. Just like you, no matter how beautiful your facial features are, they're not your own. People like you only remind people of one word: ugly people make mischief." Just as Rongyu Ishinlan said these words, the two of them had already fought, and in the blink of an eye, they had exchanged more than 10 moves. Ji Xinhua had never thought that Rongyu Ishinlan could be so ruthless. Every word she said was like stepping on Rong Shiho's sore spot, causing him to be enraged. Countless light green light waves attacked Rongyu Ishinlan like lightning, wanting to chop her into pieces. As for Rongyu Ishinlan, it was only at this moment that Ji Xinhua saw his real kung fu. It came like thunder, and when it left, it was like the calm sea. His movements were extremely fast, and his slender sword was like lightning that broke through the dark clouds, circling around Rongyu Ishinlan under his control. The kung fu he was using now was completely different from the one he used to fight the dragon. At that time, he was still joking around and didn't use his full strength. He even schemed against Ji Xinhua so that she couldn't stay out of it. But now, his handsome face, which always liked to smile, didn't have much expression. His thin lips were slightly pursed, and his eyes were filled with murderous intent. His aura was originally very strong, but he was always gentle. When he was with Ji Xinhua, he had all kinds of expressions: teasing, humorous, gentle, elegant. This made Ji Xinhua think that he was the most elegant playboy. She had seen him many times, but she had never seen him like this. His handsome face was cold and murderous. Every move was fatal, as if he was possessed by the god of war. Looking at his moves and power, Ji Xinhua's fingers clenched. She was indeed inferior to him. Even if she could use spells and her body was at its peak, she probably wouldn't be able to last more than 50 moves against him. It was no wonder that before he ran away from home, he was crowned as the #1 expert in the Fanine continent. It was not until hundreds of years after he left that this title was replaced by someone else. It seemed that he really lived up to his reputation. Her gaze fell on Rong Shiho again. Rong Shiho was not someone easy to deal with either. The green light in his palms suddenly turned into lightning and then into a ferocious beast, pouncing on Rong Yuetian. Sand and pebbles were flying all over the place. In this kind of life-or-death situation, if one couldn't use spells, there was no way for outsiders to interfere. After such a long time, the blood in Ji Xinhua's body finally flowed freely. She looked at the battlefield for a moment, then suddenly turned around and left, heading straight for the small forest in the distance. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. The two people fighting naturally saw this scene as well. Rong Shiho sneered, "A woman is a woman. You're fighting for her here, but she abandoned you and ran away alone." Rong Yuetian made a sound of acknowledgement and didn't comment. However, while he was talking, she made a few more moves in succession. Her sword pierced through Rong Shiho's ribs, bringing with it a faint black liquid, which should be his blood. Chapter 2790. Rong Shiho snorted and stepped back. Black cheats circled around the wound on his body, and the wound miraculously disappeared. He sneered, "I'm now the king of resentful spirits. Your sword can't hurt me." Before he could finish speaking, Rongyu Ishinlan's sword pierced through his shoulder. If he hadn't dodged quickly, the sword would have pierced through his shoulder blade. Rong Shiho's face turned pale. What kind of skill is it to attack someone while they're talking? Don't you exalted immortals fight openly and honorably? Rong Yishinlin waved his hand, and a slender sword appeared in his hand. His eyes were still cold. I think you have some misunderstanding about the exalted immortals. It doesn't matter. It's not too late to correct it now. As he spoke, he had already attacked 17 or 18 times. Rong Shiho was so angry that his teeth itched. The exalted immortal in front of him was actually evenly matched with him. Back then, he was unrivaled in the entire Fanine continent. No one was his match, not even the exalted immortals. The 3 exalted immortals in the Fanine continent, who were as rare as phoenix feathers and unicorn horns, had all been defeated by him. 2 of them died and 1 was injured. He thought that he was the absolute king of this continent, and no one would be his match. He didn't expect that after more than 10,000 years, he would meet an opponent like Rong Yishinlin. Although he died in this misty mountain more than 10,000 years ago due to an accident, he also became the biggest and strongest resentful spirit here. The mountains and waters of Misty Mountain were suitable for resentful spirits to recuperate. In addition, he had devoured many resentful spirits in the past 10,000 years, so his skills were higher than when he was alive. The Misty Mountain had its own rules. No matter how heaven-defying his cultivation was, he was still confined in the predestined bead. He could only come out at certain times to get some fresh air and do what he wanted. However, Ji Xinyue's unintentional mining gave him absolute freedom. Naturally, he was overjoyed. His first thought was to devour the 2 people who entered the mountain, then pretend to be one of them and sneak out of the mountain. He could run rampant in the Fanine continent again and do something big. When Ji Xinyue was being chased by his resentful spirit subordinates all over the mountain, he had been hiding in the fate bead. He looked arrogant, but he was cautious. He secretly checked the movements of the 2 people in the bead. His intuition told him that the woman was highly skilled in martial arts. On the other hand, that man didn't even seem to be able to use the most ordinary qin gong, so there was nothing to worry about. Therefore, his first plan was to deal with Ji Xinyu. As for the man with her, he looked like an embroidered pillow. His skin was very good, and he could use him directly. He hated women, especially beautiful women. Beautiful women are all trouble. This was an obsession that had been buried in the depths of his heart for over 10,000 years. Whenever he saw a beautiful woman, he wanted to tear her apart. That was why when he appeared, he wanted to kill Ji Xinyu, but accidentally saw her legs. It was a pair of slender but scarred legs. Those scars were like spots on a beautiful jade, covering the color of the jade itself. Those legs were ugly. Such a beautiful woman actually had such a pair of ugly legs. This made him a little surprised, but also a little happy. More than 10,000 years ago, he liked beauties and married beauties. But the beauty betrayed him, which made him gnash his teeth in hatred, and he couldn't stand the beauty anymore. Ever since he had cultivated into a vengeful spirit, he had been lacking women by his side. He was naturally disgusted by beauties and was afraid that she would make him a cuckold. Chapter 2791. And he really had no appetite for ugly women. He also didn't like women with ordinary looks. This was really a contradiction. In this way, he had been a bachelor in the Misty Mountain for more than 10,000 years. Now that he saw Ji Xinyue, he suddenly had the idea of imprisoning her by his side and making her his woman. She had a beautiful face, and he would have a lot of face if he took her out in front of others. She was ugly, and when such a woman took off her clothes, she could scare a bunch of people away. Naturally, she wasn't making him a cuckold. She was really a rare woman who met his requirements. So he began to tease her, and even wanted to use the freezing spell to brand her body with his exclusive brand so that he could always keep her by his side. Of course, if this woman liked the man who came with her, that would be good too. He would snatch the man's body and then fly away with her. In his philosophy, women needed to be subdued by strong means, and only by subduing them would they be obedient. His plan was very good, and he even thought that it would be easy to achieve, but he didn't expect to meet Rongyue Tianlan, an anomaly. This man was obviously an embroidered pillow who couldn't do anything just now, but he didn't expect that after staying in the small forest for such a short time, he would turn from a sparrow into a phoenix, into a Shangxian, and become so powerful. What was worse was that this Shangxian had a real intention to kill him as soon as he appeared. Every move he made seemed like he wanted to shatter his soul, and he had never seen those moves before. He couldn't even tell which sect they belonged to. What was worse was that although Rong Shiho's martial arts were very powerful, it also had a drawback. In a fight, one must be calm, and it was best if there were no emotional fluctuations, so that this martial arts could be used to its full potential. But at the beginning of the fight, he was first aroused by desire, and then provoked by Rongyue Tianlan's words. The anger in his heart burned into a ball, making him unable to calm down for a while. It was difficult to use its full potential during a fight. Under such circumstances, he was forced by Rongyue Tianlan into a fluster, and he was actually a little overwhelmed. Naturally, he was unwilling to give up, so he instigated all kinds of discord during the fight, and even tempted him with benefits. For example, he said, "That girl left you and ran away alone, so it can be seen that she has no feelings for you. Why do you have to work so hard? How about this? You came to Misty Mountain to break off the engagement with her, right? Let me go and let me take her. As long as I take her life, your marriage contract will cease to exist. You can also save yourself a lot of trouble. You should know that it's not easy to annul an engagement here. Even if you reach the marriage pillar, you still have to go through the perverted test there. I lost my life in that test, so it's best if you don't go." Rong Shiho felt that he had made the pros and cons clear enough. If the other party was smart, he would listen to his advice. However, Rongyue Tianlan, who was on the opposite side, seemed to have eaten a heavy weight and steeled her heart. She acted as if she did not hear his words and attacked even more ruthlessly. Just now, he only wanted to mess with his soul, but now, his move was developing in the direction of destroying his soul. Rong Shiho tried to run away several times, but Rongyue Yishanlan was guarding against him so tightly that he couldn't escape from the other party's encirclement. Moreover, this was the scroll of the universe, and space was limited. Even if he wanted to escape, where could he escape to? Ji Xinyu naturally did not run. No matter how dangerous it was, she did not have the habit of abandoning her companions and running away. Chapter 2792. She finally changed into a spare set of clothes in the small forest and felt a little more at ease. She had been naked just now. Although she was covered by a dress, the dress was torn in half at that time. The wind blew her dress and she was completely exposed. Not only did that bastard Rong Shiho see it, but Rongyue Yishanlan also probably saw it too. She didn't want to imagine what Rongyue Yishanlan would think when she saw all this. Anyway, she only had one thought now: she had lost a lot of face. She wanted to get back at him and kill Rong Shiho. She would gouge out his eyes and step on them like balls. She quickly changed her clothes and put the set of clothes he threw to her into the storage space. She raised her hand and took a pill that could quickly improve her skills. She sat on the ground for half an hour and felt that her body was full of strength again. Then, she rushed out. The originally peaceful and quiet grassland was now filled with flying sand and stones. The sword light was like lightning, wrapped in the 9 heavens' divine thunder, shooting toward Rong Shiho like a flower. Each strike was stronger and fiercer than the last. Rong Shiho's body was cut by the sword light. Although his regenerative ability was strong, the injuries were too concentrated. Many of the wounds had not had time to heal before new wounds were added. The blood flowing from his body began to be as thick as ink, and slowly became lighter. His white robe was now dyed with patches of blue and white flowers. His hair was also messy, and he looked very miserable. Ji Xinyue stood outside the circle with a knife. She wanted to pounce on Rong Shiho and stab him a few times, but with Rong Yuishanlin's dense sword array, she couldn't intervene. It seemed that Rong Shiho was destined to die in Rong Yuishanlin's hands. Ji Xinyue breathed a sigh of relief, but she was also a little unwilling. She wanted to end that wretched man with her own hands. Once one was at a disadvantage in a fight, it would be extremely difficult to turn the tables again. If one was injured again, it would be even more impossible. Rong Shiho also understood this point, but he couldn't escape no matter how hard he tried. He naturally saw Ji Xinyue running back and standing not far away to watch the battle. He wanted to rush over and grab Ji Xinyue as a hostage, but Rong Yuishanlin didn't give him the chance. As long as he got a little closer to Ji Xinyue, he would be attacked by Rong Yuishanlin like a storm. Over the past 10,000 years, Rong Shiho had killed many resentful couples here. After these resentful couples met him, they all hoped that he would kill them so that they could be free. These resentful couples could not attack each other. Once they attacked each other and harmed each other, it would be equivalent to breaking the rules here and they would never be able to leave. However, if the other party was killed by other monsters in the mountains, that would not be the case. Therefore, those resentful couples who came in all wished that the other party would die in their place. Rong Shiho had never seen the way this couple interacted with each other before. The exalted immortal before him was indeed protecting that young girl. That young girl's eyes never left the battlefield, and her pretty face was filled with unconcealable concern. Rong Yuishanlin's long sword and cultivation method were Dharma treasures that could restrain resentment. Every time Rong Shiho was struck by his sword, the resentment on his body would decrease a little. His body and even his very being were supported by this resentment. As the resentment dissipated, he could not hold on any longer. In the end, his footsteps began to stagger, and every move he made was somewhat lacking in strength. If this continued, he wouldn't be able to hold on for another quarter of an hour. Chapter 2793. Although Ji Xinyue couldn't intervene for the time being, she was a martial arts expert and could naturally see that. She heaved a sigh of relief but also sighed in her heart. That bastard got off too easy. Letting him die so easily. Before she could finish her thought, she suddenly heard the sound of the wind. Rong Yuishanlin had actually flashed to her side. Be good, I can't hold on anymore. You do the rest. Rong Shiho's green light was coming at her. Ji Xinyue couldn't avoid it and could only use her knife to block it. Rong Shiho was obviously an arrow at the end of its flight, so Ji Xinyue easily blocked the green light. After the two of them exchanged blows, Ji Xinyue was relieved. It was time for her to beat him while he was down. She couldn't help but glance at Rong Yuishanlin, who was standing next to her, and her heart was filled with warmth. He was giving her a chance to take revenge on her own. He was really meticulous to have even considered this. He really knew how to take care of people. Ji Xinyue, who had never been taken care of before, felt an indescribable warmth surge in her heart. It was both sweet and sour. Ji Xinyue really hated this Rong Shiho, so she didn't hesitate to beat him while he was down. After a quarter of an hour, Rong Shiho's eyes were blinded by the tip of her knife, and one of his hands was cut off by her. Rong Shiho howled in pain. Ji Xinyue also felt that the anger in her heart was almost vented and was about to add another blow to his vital point. But a sudden change happened in an instant. Before Ji Xinyue's knife tip pierced Rong Shiho's heart, his whole body suddenly emitted a large mass of red light. The red light was extremely coquettish. Ji Xinyue was stimulated by the red light and subconsciously narrowed her eyes. Be careful. A blue figure suddenly pounced on her. Before she could react, he quickly rolled to the side with her in his arms. However, it was too late. In the red light, Rong Shiho laughed and said, "He actually loves you very much." Before he could finish his sentence, the red light directly exploded in his body. Boom. There was a deep crater on the ground. Around the crater, trees had fallen and boulders had shattered. Everything was no longer the same as before. The power of the explosion was too great. In modern terms, it was as if a nuclear bomb had exploded on the spot. Ji Shinyu was lying at the bottom of the crater. Although at the moment of the explosion, she subconsciously used her inner force to block her hearing, but the aftershocks of the explosion still made her eardrums buzz, and she couldn't hear anything for a long time. Her body was also numb from the shock, and she couldn't feel anything for a while. She wasn't even sure if her limbs were still there. Was he still alive? She didn't know how much time had passed before she finally regained her strength. She could sense her own body, her own limbs. It hurts. After the absolute numbness, pain attacked her nerves again. Her body trembled slightly, as if every cell in her body was in pain. She was extremely resistant to pain, but this kind of pain was unbearable. She originally wanted to endure it out of habit, but Rongyue Tianlan's words suddenly flashed in her mind. If you're in pain, just shout it out. Girls don't have to be so strong. She couldn't help but exclaim softly, "It hurts." There was no movement in his surroundings. No one comforted her. There was only the sound of the wind blowing in her ears. Her mind, which had been muddled by the explosion, suddenly became clear. She vaguely remembered that before the explosion, he had pounced on her. Chapter 2794. Her body trembled, and she forced herself to sit up from the ground. She looked around, and her heart sank. She was the only one in the pit, and there was no sign of Rong Tianlan. Where was he? At the last moment, he was rolling around with her in his arms, and he used his body to protect her. Now that she had survived, what about him? Ji Shinyu stumbled to her feet and searched the big pit like a madman, but she couldn't even find a corner of his clothes. He was already a mighty immortal, and he had such powerful martial arts. It was impossible for a mere explosion to make him disappear, right? Then where could he be? The big pit created by the explosion was very deep, and Ji Shinyu was injured, so it took a lot of effort to climb out of the deep pit. She didn't care about the pain in her body, and after climbing out of the deep pit, she panted and searched around. After she came out and saw the aftermath of the explosion, she realized how serious the explosion was. The small forest in the distance was gone, and the original green mountains and clear waters had become bare and messy. Even the sky, which was originally filled with white clouds, was dark. Thick clouds rolled crazily in the sky, as if a rainstorm was brewing. She was the first to bear the brunt of the explosion. If it wasn't for Rong Tianlan's protection, she, who couldn't use magic to protect herself, would have been blown into a pile of powder. Ji Shinyu didn't dare to think about what Rong Tianlan's sudden disappearance meant. She just subconsciously searched and searched again, not letting go of any corner. She didn't know when the strong wind became biting cold, and it blew on her body like a small knife, messing up her hair and slapping her skin. But she couldn't care less. There was only one thought in her mind, and that was to find him. Even if she only found a broken arm, half of a robe, she didn't know where her body was broken again, and blood dripped down her ankles. Wherever she walked, blood would flow. Rong Tianlan, Rong Tianlan, Rong Tianlan. She called out to him over and over again with a hoarse voice, looking for him hopelessly. The more she looked, the farther she went. Until she saw a lake that should have been unfathomable. The reason why it should have been called a lake was because its water was very high from the shore, and this lake should have been full before the explosion. Because the shore was still wet, the lake should have been behind the small forest. Now that the small forest was gone, the lake was exposed. This huge explosion caused the lake to sink by 4 or 5 meters, and it was precisely because of these 4 or 5 meters that Ji Shinyu finally found him. Rongyu Ishanlin was in the water. He was at the bottom of the lake. Looking across the rippling water, he could see his figure, Rongyu Tianlan. Ji Shinyu was overjoyed. With a loud cry, she jumped into the water without even thinking about it. It was indeed Rongyu Ishanlin underwater, but his posture was a little strange. He sat there with his palms together in front of him, as if he was meditating. When Ji Shinyu desperately swam to his side, he didn't react at all, sitting there like a stone statue. Ji Shinyu didn't quite understand why he hugged her and rolled around at the moment of the explosion. And after the explosion, Ji Shinyu, was left in the deep pit, but he appeared directly in the lake. Could it be that his body was blown up and flew directly into the lake? But if he was sent flying by the explosion, he shouldn't be in this position, right? Could it be that after he woke up in the water and found out that he was injured, he immediately meditated? Chapter 2795. Ji Shinyu didn't quite understand what had happened to him, but seeing him sitting there perfectly fine, she inexplicably wanted to cry. At the same time, she heaved a sigh of relief. Thank God he was fine. Otherwise, she really didn't know how guilty she would be. It was impossible to breathe while meditating underwater. Ji Shinyu was afraid that he would drown, so she half supported and half carried him to the surface. Fortunately, the water was not deep at this time. She carried him and popped her head out quickly, and with great effort, she carried him to the shore. Originally, she could have done it with a light leap, but now she was sweating profusely from exhaustion. When she placed Rongyu Tianlan on the shore, she was almost paralyzed from exhaustion, and her vision turned black. She gasped for breath for a while before she recovered. She wiped the sweat on her forehead and said, Rongyu Tianlan, how did you fall into the water? You actually flew so far, and made me flip over the turf over there. Rongyu Tianlan sat there quietly beside her with his eyes slightly closed, like a Buddha. To be able to sit there so peacefully, he should be fine, right? And although she was the one who fished him out of the water, his whole body was dry, without a trace of water. Obviously, he had set up a protective enchantment when he was meditating in the water. If he could set up an enchantment, then how serious could his injuries be? Ji Shinyu looked at him worriedly again. There were no wounds on his body, and his ink-black hair draped over his shoulders, not a single strand out of place. His blue robe was like water ripples, and his whole body was dry. He was neat as if he had just returned from a banquet, and there was not a trace of embarrassment on him. On the other hand, she was originally covered in blood and mud, but after being tossed around in the water, the blood and mud were gone, but her whole body was dripping wet, and her clothes and hair were all sticking to her body. She was like a drowned rat, and couldn't be more embarrassed. In comparison, she looked more like someone had fished her out of the water. Ji Shinyu sighed in her heart that the exalted immortal was indeed an exalted immortal. She moved to his side and looked at his expression and posture. Her expression suddenly changed. His posture had not changed, and even when she dragged him out of the water, he was still in the same position. She paused for a moment, then reached out with her finger and tested it under his nose. Her fingertips trembled slightly. She raised her hand to hold his wrist and felt his pulse. A moment later, her face was even paler than his. He had no breath, no heartbeat, no pulse, and even his arms were cold. He was dead. What was sitting there was actually a corpse. Ji Shinyu's heart felt as if it had been struck by someone, the pain spread to her limbs and bones, and her head was buzzing. He was dead. How could someone like him die? How could an ascendant immortal die so easily? Her face was pale as she busied herself around him. She used all the first aid methods she knew on him, but there was no improvement at all. Ji Xinyue became more and more panicked. Although this person had caused her a lot of harm, he had saved her several times over the past few days. In the Misty Mountains, he had always protected her. This was the first time she had tasted the feeling of being protected like a little girl. But now, this person was dead. His death was so strange. He actually loved you very much. Ji Xinyue's mind suddenly recalled the words Rong Shiho had said before he died. At that time, the situation was too dangerous, so she didn't pay attention to those words. But now, they suddenly appeared in her mind. Chapter 2796. Her heart felt like it was being squeezed by someone. She stared at him, who was sitting there, in a daze. He loved her. Was that possible? Didn't he like her little sister? How could he like her? If he really liked her, why would he come to Misty Mountain with her and take such a huge risk to break off the engagement? She believed that if he really loved her, he would definitely not break off the engagement. If he didn't want to break off the engagement, her father, the South Heaven Emperor, would naturally not want to break off the engagement. Even if she wanted to break off the engagement, he wouldn't have cooperated. There wouldn't be such a scene here. But if he didn't love her, why would he risk his life to save her? In that situation, he was completely acting instinctively. He instinctively used his life to protect her. Could it be that he was still feeling guilty? But according to legend, this person liked to owe people favors. He wasn't someone who would feel guilty after owing someone a favor, but it was hard to say. After all, this person had been wandering outside for so many years. His personality might have suddenly changed. She thought about it, and all kinds of thoughts came one after another. Her chest seemed to be hiding a pot of boiling water, rolling over and over. She suddenly shook her head. Now was not the time to think about this. She looked at him, who was sitting quietly with his eyes closed. Other than the lack of breath, he looked like he was sleeping. He didn't look like a dead person at all. She didn't give up and circled around him again. She touched his nose and his chest again. Her heart was so flustered that it didn't seem like her own. She couldn't calm down no matter what. She didn't believe that he was dead. She wanted him to take another breath. His life was only a single breath away. She desperately thought about all kinds of first aid methods. Suddenly, a light flashed in her mind. She suddenly thought of a way. She pounced on Rong Yu Tianlan, who was sitting there, and pushed him to the ground. Then, she began to give him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. She wasn't familiar with it. When she pressed on his chest, the strength was not right. Even when she forced open his mouth to pass air into his mouth, her lips knocked against his teeth. When Rong Yu Tianlan woke up, he saw this scene when he opened his eyes. A girl who was drenched from head to toe was half lying on top of him. Her pretty face was pale, and her face was serious. Her eyes were wide open, and her slightly cold lips were pressed against his, blowing air into his mouth with all her might. Her breath was like an orchid, blowing into his mouth, causing his heart to skip a few beats the moment he woke up. He widened his eyes and looked at her without any reaction. On the other hand, she was a little dizzy from continuously blowing air into him. When she started to give him air, her lips touched his for the first time. She was still a little nervous, and her lips were still trembling. But later on, she had been busy saving people and had completely forgotten that the person under her body was a man. She only had the thought of helping him regain his breath. Although she wanted him to wake up, she didn't expect him to wake up at this time. At that time, her lips were still pressed against his, and the two of them just stared at each other for a while, neither of them reacting. Rong Yu Tianlan was restraining herself from reacting, while Ji Xinyu had forgotten to react in hindsight. After a while, Rong Yu Tianlan, who was under her, moved. Her eyes blinked slightly, and her head tilted slightly to the side, their lips parted, and her soft lips brushed past his cheek. She seemed to wake up from a dream and suddenly raised her head. She raised her head too quickly, and she was a little dizzy. Chapter 2797. She lifted her head too quickly and felt a little dizzy. This action almost made her roll away from his body and land beside him. In her nervousness, she asked a stupid question, "You're awake?" She was clearly saving someone, but she looked like she had done something bad and was caught red-handed. A blush crept up her cheeks. Rongyue Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly, as deep as a pool of water. It stayed on her face for a moment, then quickly moved away. He slowly propped himself up and tried to sit up, but he was a little weak and fell back down weakly. Ji Xinyue was quick to react. Almost without thinking, she stretched out her arms and hugged him from behind. He fell into her arms, but this posture was a little intimate. The redness on Ji Xinyue's face that had just faded seemed to spread again, but she forced herself to be calm. She quickly straightened him up and teased him, "When did you become so weak? You're still an immortal." She said these teasing words to ease the inexplicable tension in her heart and the slightly ambiguous atmosphere between the two of them. She thought that with Rongyue Tianlan's usual temperament, he might take advantage of the situation to lie on her and say, "I've always been this weak, it's not like you've never known. Come, straighten me up," or something that deserved a beating. But she obviously thought too much. After Rongyue Tianlan sat down, he actually cupped his hands and bowed to her, "Thank you, princess." He was very polite and courteous, just like his usual elegant self. Ji Xinyue's heart sank inexplicably. The smile that had just appeared on her lips froze on her face. She paused for a moment before replying, "You're welcome." Her tone was a little dry. "A thank you, and a you're welcome." It invisibly widened the distance between them. Ji Xinyue didn't understand him. Ever since she knew him, his attitude towards her had always been a little strange. There was seriousness in his sloppiness, and he had always been very concerned about her. Especially after entering this mountain, he was always concerned about her and protecting her. Although sometimes he was a little rude, his concern for her was not fake. It was also because of his attitude that she was able to quickly close the distance between them. She went from being wary and annoyed of him at the beginning to speaking with him in a familiar and unrestrained manner. She didn't know when he had occupied a position in her heart that wasn't too big or too small. Just as she was wondering what this position was, he suddenly became cold. Did he lose his memory? Or did he take the wrong medicine? Do you remember what happened just now? Ji Xinyu decided to probe. Rongyue Tian closed her eyes slightly and didn't look at her. "I remember. We killed Rong Shiho. He didn't lose his memory." Ji Xinyu let out a sigh of relief. "Then, do you remember what happened after you killed him?" Rongyue Tianlan opened her eyes and looked at her. The bottom of her eyes was calm. "You don't have to ask. I didn't lose my memory. Before Rong Shiho died, he risked everything and wanted to drag us down with him. He used the soul-splitting technique and almost turned the world upside down." His gaze finally fell on her body again. Her body was still wet, and her pink dress was full of spots of blood. "You're injured again." Ji Xinyu did not care about her injuries. She still had a lot of questions she wanted to know. "You clearly rolled around with me in your arms to protect me. How come after the explosion, I stayed at the bottom of the pit, but you ran so far away and fell into this lake?" Rongyue Tian sighed. "I wasn't blown here, but my body was originally here." Chapter 2798. Rongyue Ishanlan sighed. "I wasn't blown here, but my body was originally here. The one who fought with Rong Shiho was my nascent soul, not my real body. The explosion was too fierce, and I couldn't bear it for a while, so my nascent soul disappeared. Just now, it was successfully condensed, so it returned to its original body and woke up. Soul detachment technique. He actually knew the legendary soul detachment technique. No wonder he could use his spiritual force without any scruples when fighting with Rong Shiho. It turned out that he was also a soul. It wasn't strange for a person's soul to detach occasionally, but after the soul left the body, it couldn't do anything. At most, it could peep. However, Rongyu Ishanlan's soul could fight like a real body, which was unprecedentedly powerful. Based on what he said, it was his soul that protected her in the critical moment. The reason why he could wake up was not because she gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, but because he automatically gathered his soul. Ji Xinyu didn't know what to feel. Her eyes couldn't help but look at him. Just now. Thank you. If it wasn't for his soul protecting her, she was afraid that she would have been blown to pieces. At this time, she didn't know where the wandering soul was floating. Also, thank you for giving her the opportunity to kill Rong Shiho for revenge. Rongyu Ishanlan lowered his eyes. This time, he finally smiled. You don't have to be polite with me. After all, I owe you for coming to Misty Mountain. Besides, in that situation, even if it wasn't you, but someone else, I would have saved them. Ji Xinyue's heart, which was still beating fast in her chest, slowly calmed down. Looking at him, she slowly repeated, You owe me. Even if it wasn't you, I would have saved them. He was a mighty immortal, so it wasn't strange that he had great love and compassion. Ji Xinyue's heart, which was still beating fast in her chest, slowly calmed down. Looking at him, she asked, What do you owe me? Rongyu Ishanlan didn't open his eyes to look at her. After all, I delayed you for more than 3,000 years and caused you to suffer so much. So you've always wanted to compensate me, right? Ji Xinyue interrupted him and answered on his behalf. Yes, Ji Xinyue's face paled slightly, but she smiled, as expected of someone who cultivated to become a heavenly immortal. You don't want to owe anyone anything. Actually, I've already said that this marriage can't be entirely blamed on you. I don't have any other good points, but I'm magnanimous, so I don't care about this anymore. Therefore, you can keep your guilt to yourself in the future. I don't care either. Rong Yuetian was speechless. He paused and spoke again in a faint voice, I will try my best not to feel guilty. Oh right, you don't have to take Rong Shiho's last words to heart. He didn't know anything at all. What did he say in the end? Didn't he explode with a bang in the end? Ji Xinyu interrupted him and stood up. You rest first, I'll go over there and take a look. She turned around and was about to leave. Your injury. Rongyu Ishanlan couldn't help but open her mouth. Her gaze was fixed on her dress that was gradually stained with blood. The dark clouds were still rolling overhead, and the world was dark, but he could clearly see the bloodstains on her dress. It was so glaring. Ji Xinyue didn't answer. Her voice was faint, It's just a small injury, I won't die. She turned around and strode away. Rongyu Ishanlan was obviously seriously injured. Although he had woken up, his forehead was covered in cold sweat, and even the tip of his nose was dripping with cold sweat. Chapter 2799. Just now, he was still able to sit when he was out of breath, but now that he had regained his breath, he sat unsteadily. He finally fell down again, looking up at the rolling dark clouds in the sky, his fingers slowly clenched, and he closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Xinyu. Only now do I know that I have other emotional debts. In my previous life, I let her down and let her die with hatred. In this life, I won't let her down again. But I'm destined to let you down. He finally regained his memories. That's not right, these memories shouldn't belong to him completely, but to a part of his soul. Originally, when a battle's soul reincarnated, it shouldn't have any memories when it returned to its original body, and he shouldn't have regained this memory. But perhaps that feeling was too deep, too heart-wrenching, and actually left a faint impression in his mind. For example, there was the figure of the girl in pink in his mind, there was her hazy appearance, and there was even a dance. Even if it was just a figure, he didn't really care about it. He only faintly felt that the girl in his mind should be his destined lover. Especially when Shinjuli told him that his Red Luan Star movement, he subconsciously felt that if he really did have Red Luan Star movement, perhaps he would meet that girl, fall in love, get to know her, and finally travel the three realms hand in hand like Shinjuli and Ningxiuemo. When he first saw Ji Tianyue, the girl's image in his mind suddenly became clear, and highly overlapped with Ji Tianyue. Especially her expression, actions, and personality were even more similar. He thought that the heavens were not unkind to him, that he found the girl in his dreams so quickly, it couldn't be any smoother. He thought that he would naturally fall in love with the girl in his dreams, but he didn't expect that when he interacted with this girl, his heart wouldn't be stirred at all. He looked at her as if he was looking at an ignorant and naive child, and couldn't find any feelings of affection. He repeatedly pondered in his heart for a long time, and felt that the reason why he didn't have any feelings for Ji Tianyue was probably because he didn't like father-daughter relationships. If he had other thoughts about an underage girl, maybe it would be wretched. He felt that he would fall in love with her in the future. After all, she was the girl in his dreams. But he didn't know when it started, but his gaze was uncontrollably attracted to Ji Xinyu, and his thoughts couldn't help but revolve around her. Whenever he saw her chatting and laughing with other men, he would be very unhappy. When he saw her sad, he couldn't help but want to comfort her. When he saw her happy, he would be as bright as the sun. When he saw her hurt, he wanted to kill the person who hurt her. He had always thought that he felt guilty towards this girl. However, during these few days of adventure in the Misty Mountain, he gradually understood that it was not the case. When he was trapped by the Snake Beauty transformed into the person he cared about the most in the depths of his heart, Ji Xinyu. The Snake Beauty that was pestering him was much more powerful than the one that was pestering Ji Xinyu. Her human form was exactly the same as Ji Xinyu's, and she even hid her snake tail. When she pounced on his body and pestered him, he could even smell the unique fragrance on her body. Because they were too similar, even though he had sensed that something was wrong, he couldn't do it. In his life, he had killed countless demons and devils. As long as he could see through the other party's disguise, he had never shown mercy. He had encountered a heart image snake before, and that heart image snake had even transformed into his good friend Yunxi's appearance to seduce him. He didn't say anything and killed it with a single sword strike, without even blinking an eye. Chapter 2800. And this time, even though he knew that the other party was an illusory demon, he could not do anything to that face. It was also because of this that he fought with the heart image snake for so long, until the heart image snake's physical strength was exhausted and it finally revealed its true form. Only then did he strangle it to death without any hesitation. The fight with the heart image snake had exhausted a lot of his physical strength, and there were many wounds on his body. However, he could not care less and immediately rushed to find Ji Xinyu, because he knew that the heart image snake would not appear. Once it appeared, it would easily form a pair and attack two people separately. His guess was right, Ji Xinyu was indeed entangled by the heart image snake. If he wanted to save her from the heart image snake, he could not act rashly. Because the heart image snake entangled not only the human body, but also the soul. If he acted blindly, not only would he not be able to save her, he would also hurt her soul, and it might even cause her soul to scatter. If he wanted to save her unharmed, he could only use the flute to melt the ice around her body and stimulate the snake to return to its original form. And this flute sound was not an ordinary flute sound, it had to be played with a special blowing method. And this special blowing method required psychokinesis. Left with no choice, he could only use the soul shell shedding technique, using his soul to blow this special flute sound. As expected, he had succeeded. The ice on her body melted. She no longer allowed the snake to do whatever it wanted. She sliced the snake open while it was still alive. The snake even looked like him. She did not hesitate at all when she made her move. At that time, he did not know what to feel when he saw it. Although he was very gratified that she was not mesmerized by the heart image snake's illusion, that clean cut of her blade made him shiver. Using the soul detachment technique in Misty Mountain required more than half of his strength, and he was also injured. The soul detachment technique and the flute sound made his injuries worse, and he could not even use his light body technique. Of course, it was not that he could not use it. If he worked hard, he could still walk normally. However, when he saw Ji Shinyu cleanly cut him in half, he felt a little uncomfortable, and could not help but want to find some trouble for her so that she could take him away. This girl was amenable to coaxing, but not coercion. When he was a little weak, her maternal instincts immediately flared up, and she took good care of him. He felt that his wounded soul was slightly comforted. For a moment, he couldn't figure out what kind of feelings he had for her, but subconsciously, he didn't want to go their separate ways after breaking off the engagement. So, he wanted to take her in as a disciple, but he didn't expect her to be so loyal to her master. He even felt that she liked her master. This feeling made him very unhappy. Before he could think of a way to deal with it, she had already discovered the yuan bead. This led to a series of unforeseen events later on. Ji Shinyu, Rongyue Tianlan, Rongyue Tianlan. This person was known as the number one person in the Fanning continent 13,000 years ago. Although his appearance was not very good, his evil techniques were top-notch. In the past, he was a person who could do whatever he wanted in the Fanning continent. His excellent bone structure and mind made him extremely proud, but his dwarf body and ordinary appearance made him feel extremely inferior. His extreme arrogance and inferiority complex made him violent and cold, and the way he did things was a little confusing. It was unknown how many people had died at his hands back then. Perhaps it was a sin, but Rong Shiho took a fancy to a famous beautiful fairy in Shinyu Tianhen 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 Tianhen. Chapter 2801. Unfortunately, the beautiful fairy was not interested in him, and he couldn't win her heart no matter how hard he tried. In a fit of anger, he used forceful means to snatch the woman in his hands, forcefully possessing her. Then, he used thunderous means to force the patriarch of the beauty's family, making the patriarch have no choice but to agree to his marriage proposal. The arm could not resist the thigh, and the beauty married him just like that. Although the beauty had married him, she had always been depressed. He had thought of 10,000 ways to make her happy, but to no avail. Later, in a fit of anger, he neglected the beauty and threw her into a remote courtyard, ignoring her. He, on the other hand, was indulging himself in wine and women, sleeping in the willows, living a happy life. He thought that since she married him, she would treat him as her sky no matter what and not always give him a cold shoulder. He probably thought that by ignoring her for a while, she would change her mind and truly fall into his arms. But the end result was that his wife ran away with someone else in the courtyard. When he found out, he was naturally furious. He tried every means to find the escaping pair of mandarin ducks and recognized that the one who made him a cuckold was her senior brother. Her lover's martial arts were average, but his appearance was very good. He was a real handsome guy. When the two of them were discovered, she seemed to have thrown caution to the wind and refused to admit defeat. She said that she had always liked her senior martial brother, and that Rong Shiho had used force to break them apart. Now that she and her senior martial brother were together, he could kill her, but he couldn't bring her back. Rong Shiho probably really loved his wife, so he didn't do anything to her. Instead, he looked directly at his wife's lover. That lover didn't have a backbone. After being coldly stared at by him, he immediately cowered. He took the initiative to kneel and beg for mercy, saying that he was just confused for a moment and didn't want to elope with his junior sister. It was his junior sister who threatened him with her life to take her away. Rong Shiho deliberately let that man make a fool of himself in front of him to make his wife give up. But he didn't expect that his wife looked at her lover for a long time as if she didn't know him. Suddenly, she smiled and raised her hand to commit suicide. Rong Shiho naturally wouldn't allow her to die. He saved her and then slapped her lover's face in front of her. He thought that his wife would change her mind after seeing her lover's ugly behavior, but he didn't expect that she would really want to die and use all kinds of suicide methods. Rong Shiho was tired of dealing with her. In the end, he finally relented and said that he could divorce her, but he had to go to Misty Mountain to break off the engagement. Later on, he and his wife went to the Misty Mountain, but neither of them came out. No one knew what Rong Shiho and his wife had gone through in the Misty Mountain that made them lose their lives. After Rong Shiho died, he turned into a vengeful spirit. He probably thought that his wife didn't like him because he was too ugly, so after he became a vengeful spirit, he began to devour vengeful spirits and kill other people who entered the mountain. When he met someone with a handsome face, he would remove their facial skin and melt the most beautiful part of them onto his own face. As a result, over the years, he had become a handsome man who had been assembled. He was completely different from his previous appearance. Rong Yu Tianlan had only heard of him. When she first saw him, she really didn't recognize him. Rong Yu Tianlan was only certain of his identity when he used his perverted skills on Ji Xinyu. If they were outside and this person was still alive, he would not be Rong Yu Tianlan's opponent. Chapter 2802. But this was Misty Mountain. Not only could Rong Yu Tianlan not use his telekinesis, but he was also injured. He had no chance of winning against an abnormal person like Rong Shiho. And he couldn't just watch Ji Xinyu be humiliated, so he used the soul detachment technique again. The soul detachment technique was a forbidden technique that could only be used once a year. It would cause irreversible damage to the body. And this time, he had to use it for the second time in a day. Originally, when he used the soul detachment technique, he could leave a part of his soul behind to guard his body and not be disturbed. But this time, because he had to use his soul to fight a fierce battle, he could only leave all of his soul. In this way, his body was no different from an ordinary person's body and couldn't be damaged at all. So when Rong Yu Tianlan left his soul for the second time, he put his body in a lake far away from the battlefield to avoid being discovered by Rong Shiho. This battle was extremely difficult. Although Rong Yu Tianlan used the soul detachment technique many times, he didn't use it in a face-to-face fight. So he wasn't very proficient in it and wasn't as handy as his body. And the opponent was a vengeful spirit who was a top master when he was alive and had cultivated for more than 10,000 years after his death. So even if Rong Yu Tianlan's martial arts were much higher than Rong Shiho's in the real world, he still needed to use some methods and spend a lot of effort to win this battle. Fortunately, they won in the end. But he didn't expect Rong Shiho to use such an abnormal method of self-destruction before he died. In order to protect Ji Xinyu, Rong Yu Tianlan's soul was injured by the explosion and couldn't return to his body for a long time. When he finally returned, the battle's soul had become his main soul, probably due to his other souls being heavily injured. The battle's soul's memories that had been suppressed in the clouds rushed into his mind. Ji Yu, Jun Luyi, Yi Qian Shang, memories surged in his mind like a torrent, making him unable to react for a while. The guilt, heartache, and despair of the past seemed to have happened yesterday. Ji Yu's appearance was unprecedentedly clear. She was exactly the same as Ji Tianyu, and there was only one word difference between their names. Even their temperaments were similar. Smart, beautiful, innocent, and made people want to protect her well. Of course, Ji Tianyue had probably seen a lot of palace dramas, so she was more scheming than Ji Yu back then. She would also use some methods to make him feel unfamiliar. But overall, Ji Tianyu and Ji Yu were very similar. If there was no accident, Ji Tianyu should be the reincarnation of Ji Yu. In her previous life, he had let her down and let her die in his arms with hatred. In this life, he had found her again. How could he let her down again? He originally wanted to properly sort out his feelings for Ji Xinyu, but after recovering this memory, he couldn't think about it anymore. Just take it as him feeling guilty towards her. It was impossible for them to have any further development. Fortunately, she didn't seem to have fallen in love with him. She still had so many friends by her side, and she still had her master. One less person shouldn't be a big deal to her. He directly smothered this unclear feeling of his to death in the bud. He was right to do so. He told himself. Towards things that shouldn't happen, feelings that don't belong to you should be cut off cleanly. They couldn't be sloppy. That would be the best for both of them. He did a good job and was very successful. Chapter 2803. Originally, Ji Xinyu had already treated him like a friend, even throwing herself into his arms and performing mouth-to-mouth resuscitation in order to save him. After he came back to life, her eyes were as bright as the stars. There was true joy and happiness. But he couldn't seem to treat her as a normal friend, so he could only treat her coldly and alienate her. But she was sensitive and smart, she must have noticed his coldness and alienation. Her starry eyes dimmed, and she turned to leave. He lay there, watching her figure gradually disappear. His heart felt like it was weighed down by a weight, heavy and painful. For a moment, he wanted to call her back, or at least give her a bottle of spirit medicine to apply on her wounds. However, his rationality stopped him. Since there was no fate, he should let go. The more contact they had, the more entanglement they would have. It was disadvantageous for both of them. He closed his eyes slightly. He should get up and meditate at this time, but he didn't have any strength. It was as if there was a fire burning in his heart. He didn't want to move for a while. His injuries were too severe. He felt a little dazed as he lay there, and the faint pain in his heart made him feel dry. There seemed to be some movement beside his ear. He suddenly opened his eyes, looking at her who had returned. His heart skipped a beat. Ji Xinyu was holding 4 rolled-up straw mats in her hands, looking down at him. Do you want to get up and meditate to recover? Rong Yu Tianlan paused for a moment, then nodded. For a moment, he didn't understand the function of the straw mats in her hands. Ji Xinyu seemed to be too lazy to explain to him, and directly spread out a straw mat on the ground, then said lightly, "The ground is cold, it's not good for your recovery, sit here and meditate." As she spoke, she helped him sit on the straw mat. Afraid that he would be too weak to sit, she also put 3 more straw mats on his back, left arm and right arm. The straw mats were obviously made recently. They still had a very light fragrance of plants, seeping into the heart. Rong Yu Tianlan sat on the 3 straw mats. It was very stable. He looked at the straw mats beside him, then looked at her. His voice was slightly cold. You just made them? Actually, you don't have to spend so much effort. I just need to rest for a while and I can meditate anywhere. Ji Xinyu was busying herself around him. When she heard his words, she paused for a moment. It's not that troublesome. It's just a few straw mats. The materials are all readily available. After a pause, she smiled and said, You don't have to take it to heart. After all, you became like this because you wanted to save me. What's more, you've taken care of me a lot along the way, so I should do something for you. He paused for a moment before continuing, if it were someone else like you, I would have done the same. So you don't have to feel like you owe me a favor. The sooner you recover from your injuries, the sooner we can break off this engagement." These words were said beautifully and appropriately. Rong Yu Tianlan couldn't say a word. After Ji Shenyu finished, she clapped her hands and turned to leave. He couldn't help but ask, "Your injuries? I've already bandaged it, and I've also used Qilin resin, so it'll heal very quickly." Ji Shenyu's tone was relaxed, "So you should also quickly get better. I don't want to stay in this damned place any longer." She strode away again, and he didn't know where she was going. Rong Yu Tianlan looked at her back for a moment, then finally closed his eyes and began to meditate. Chapter 2804. Although there were mountains, rivers, and trees in the scroll of the universe, it wasn't very big. The explosion just now had affected the entire environment, the forest was gone, and the small mountain was turned into a small hill full of rubble. Ji Shenyu forced herself to walk to the lee of the hill, and finally couldn't take it anymore. She staggered and sat down on a rock. Her body was in great pain, and her hands and feet were weak, so she just lay down on the rock. The dark clouds in the sky were still rolling, as if a storm was brewing. Ever since the explosion, the sky here looked like it was the end of the world, and it was no longer as bright as when she first came in. She opened her eyes wide and looked at the dark clouds, as if there was something on them that attracted her. Maybe it was because she had opened her eyes for a long time, but her eyes seemed to be misty and sore. She seemed to be tired, and simply covered her eyes with her hand. After a while, she moved her hand away and looked at her palm. There was a little water stain on her palm. She was startled, and wiped the water stain on her body. She hugged her knees for a moment, then suddenly laughed and shook her head. "Ji Shenyu, you really thought too much. He was really good to you because of guilt, and not because this person was so particular about perfection. Even a handkerchief that he used to wipe sweat was exquisitely embroidered, without a single wrinkle on it. How could such a person really fall in love with her, who was covered in bruises and even made her hair stand on end when she saw it? He was a playboy, and taking care of women was his noble demeanor, but it had nothing to do with his true feelings. He often said some ambiguous words to her, but it was just a playboy's behavior, but it made her unconsciously think too much, and her heart that was as calm as an ancient well gradually became turbulent. However, he probably realized that he was about to go overboard, so he automatically stopped and became cold and distant towards her. At first, she was a little unaccustomed to it, but after sitting here for so long, she slowly got used to it. Fortunately, she hadn't fallen in yet. Fortunately, it was still not too late. Her emotional world was originally sealed in ice, but she didn't know when he had forcefully pushed open a crack. Because the sunlight would shine in, but it turned out that it was all an illusion. The door to her heart closed again. She smiled, there was nothing wrong with this. She didn't have to worry about the messy emotions that she had been feeling lately. His swift and decisive action was well executed. He was free, and so was she. She thought that the reason why she was a little moved was probably because it was the first time in her life that someone had pampered her like a little girl. After finishing her apprenticeship, she had many companions every time she went out for adventures, but those companions were not as good as her. When they were in danger, she had always been their backbone, their pillar of support. She had always been the one saving them and taking care of them. She was disguised as a man, and those people treated her as their life and death brother, as their boss. When he was with Rongyue Tianlan, he always treated her as a real girl and took good care of her. He even flirted with her a little. This made her feel very new and warm, so she was a little moved. She didn't know who said that the stronger a girl was, the softer her heart was. Sometimes she would want to find a shoulder to lean on, and sometimes she would want someone to pamper her like a little girl, and Rongyue Tianlan happened to do this, prying open her heart that had been frozen for a long time. But now she understood what he was thinking. Chapter 28:05. But now she understood what he was thinking. He didn't have that kind of feeling towards her, she was just overthinking it. Then why should she be conflicted? Make life difficult for herself? She could live a carefree life on her own. It would be foolish to be conflicted over a relationship that didn't belong to her. She didn't want to be such a fool. She would just treat him as a normal friend in the future. She took a light breath, rubbed her eyes, and sat up. Only then did she start to truly heal herself. She had suffered quite a few injuries this time, but fortunately they were all superficial wounds. She applied some medicine on the lighter wounds, cleaned the deeper wounds, applied some medicine, and bandaged them. Everything would be fine. There was one wound that was especially deep, on the side of her waist. It was a bit scary with its mouth open. It wasn't convenient for her to bandage this place, so she finally took out the qilin resin. It wasn't easy to get the qilin resin, and it was such a small piece. If she really applied it to all the wounds, she would probably use it all up this time. Ji Xinyu was often injured, so this thing was extremely precious to her. She naturally couldn't bear to use it all, so she only used it on places where it was inconvenient to bandage and where the wounds were deep. If not treated, it would be life-threatening. Even if she used it sparingly, she still used up more than half of it this time. Carefully putting away the rest, she looked at the sky, which was even darker than before. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder rumbled across the horizon. It was going to rain. Ji Xinyu jumped up. She jumped too quickly, and a light crack came from her broken leg. The pain was piercing to the heart. She frowned and stood in place, waiting for the pain to pass. The heavy rain came as it pleased, and after a few rumbles of thunder, the rain started to fall. This place was flat, and there wasn't even a place to hide from the rain. Fortunately, Ji Xinyu always brought everything with her, so she naturally brought an umbrella with her. She opened the umbrella and leaned against a large rock, acting as a barrier. The rain grew heavier, forming a curtain under the umbrella. Ji Xinyu took shelter from the rain for a while, then suddenly thought of something, and her expression changed. She took out an oil paper umbrella from her storage space, and braved the wind and rain to run towards the lake. No matter what, this person had saved her several times. She couldn't watch him get drowned by the rain when he was in trouble. After circling around a small hill, she finally saw him sitting by the lake from afar. Then, she slowly stopped in her tracks. The rain by the lake was even heavier, but Rongyu Yishinlin, who was meditating there, was not drenched by the rain. Above his head was a huge umbrella that Ji Xinyu had never seen before. The umbrella was painted with an ink landscape, and the surface of the umbrella was as big as a small pavilion. It protected Rongyue Tian tightly, and not a single drop of rain could get in. This person was indeed living the most exquisite life. Even an umbrella could be so unique. Ji Xinyu smiled and turned to leave. However, Rongyue Tianlan seemed to have sensed something. She raised her head and looked over, only to see her leaving figure. The rain was pouring down around her. She held a plain and clean 64-page umbrella and walked away. Her hair was very long, almost reaching her ankles. It swayed gently in the rain like a curtain. This time, she had changed into a black outfit with black hair. Only the hand holding the umbrella was white. Her back was like an ink figure drawn by a famous artist, and she gradually disappeared into the distance. Rongyue Yishinlin's eyes flickered slightly. She raised her finger slightly, as if wanting to call out to her. Chapter 28:06. Rongyue Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly. He raised his finger slightly, as if he wanted to call her, but he put it down halfway and closed his eyes to meditate again. He had always meditated very quickly, but this time, probably because of his serious injuries, he was restless. It rained heavily for an entire day. After a day, it finally cleared up. The mountains and rivers in the scroll of the universe could not be judged by common sense. It actually had the ability to restore. After a day and night of heavy rain, the woods, hills, lakes, miraculously returned to their original appearance. Even the big crater created by the explosion disappeared. Everything seemed to have returned to its original state, but where were the people? They could not return. Both their moods had changed. Rongyue Tianlan's injuries were the most serious. A few days ago, he could not move at all. He would pant after taking a few steps. There was another problem with the scroll of the universe. Every evening, there would be a heavy rain, and it would last for an entire night. After an entire night, the rain would clear up. The two of them had to recover here. It was not good to be drenched in the rain every day. Therefore, after Ji Xinyue discovered the weather here, she built 2 small grass houses the next day. The grass houses were simple, but they were enough to shelter them from the wind and rain. On the afternoon of the 3rd day, Rongyue Tianlan had just finished meditating. When he opened his eyes, he found Ji Xinyue standing in front of him. Ji Xinyue had been cultivating elsewhere for the past 2 days and had not come to his place. Now that he suddenly saw her, his heart could not help but skip a beat. Ji Xinyue did not wait for him to speak. She simply asked him, "Can you walk on your own now?" Rongyue Tianlan slowly got up. After meditating for 2 days, his body had finally recovered a little. Although he could not use lightness skills, he could still walk a few steps. He nodded. "I can walk. Do you want to leave now?" She probably could not wait. After all, she had been delayed for 3 days, but with his current injuries, it would be difficult for him to walk to the pillar of marriage alive. Ji Xinyue turned and walked away. "Follow me." Rongyue Tianlan was speechless. Although he did not know what she wanted to do, he still followed her. After a while, he finally saw the 2 grass houses. He was stunned. This place has a heavy rain every evening. You can take shelter from the rain in that house. Ji Xinyue pointed to the house on the left. Rong Yuetian's heart trembled. "You cultivated it?" Ji Xinyue raised her eyebrows. "Of course, don't tell me it can jump out on its own." She raised her head and looked at the sky. Dark clouds gathered in the sky again. A heavy rain was coming. She didn't say anything else and went straight into the hut on the right. Rongyu Tianlan paused on the spot and slowly walked into the house on the left. The 2 straw houses were not close to each other, and there was even a forest between them. After he entered this straw house, he could not see the other one. The straw hut wasn't big, and there was only 1 room. It was as short as a latrine, and there was only a straw praying mat inside. Other than that, there was nothing else. Rongyu Tianlan had just sat on the praying mat when the heavy rain fell from the sky. The rain fell on the roof of the thatch above her head, making a rustling sound. This was the most simple and crude place that Rongyu Tianlan had ever lived in his entire life, but it was also the place that made his mind the most turbulent. He was an exalted immortal who had cultivated for thousands of years. When he walked in the wilderness, he would not mind even if it was hailstones the size of eggs, let alone rain, because he could easily conjure up a house. Chapter 2807. He was very particular about his life. Even the house he casually changed was complete with pavilions and terraces. It was pleasing to the eye like an ink painting. But now, he was living in a simple house that Ji Xinyu built with her own hands. It warmed his heart more than any other luxurious house. His heart was like the waves of the sea. Although the straw hut was small, it could prevent him from suffering from the wind and rain. He had already held an umbrella for 2 nights, but no matter how luxurious and exquisite the umbrella was, it could not compare to this small straw hut. It was raining heavily outside, but he was not in the mood to meditate. He simply stood up and walked around the house. The main frame of this straw hut was built with the trees in the forest. The wood was very rough, but very sturdy. No matter how strong the wind and rain were, it would not collapse. He walked to the door and looked into the distance. However, he could only see the rain and the lush forest on the opposite side. Other than that, he could not see anything else. What was she doing in that house now? Seeing that she was walking very nimbly, her leg injury must have really healed. She actually knew how to build a house. A girl was trained to be more capable than a man. Such a girl could survive no matter what kind of harsh environment she lived in. She did not need anyone to take care of her. Seeing her like this, he should be gratified, but his heart felt as if it had been pierced by a thin needle. There was a slight pain. He shook his head. He could not think about it anymore. If he continued to think about it, he was afraid that he would fall into a quagmire. He went back to meditate again. When the sky cleared up the next day, Rong Yu Tianlan did not meditate anymore and walked out. Unknowingly, he walked near Ji Xinyu's house and saw that she was practicing behind the house. Behind her house was a small forest. She was practicing her lightness skill and hidden weapons in this forest. She was dressed in black and her movements were as nimble as a dancing butterfly. Countless leaves were shot out by her like hidden weapons, nailing the surrounding trees and shaking them. This was a girl who lived and worked hard. She might not know it herself, but she was like a luminous body, always attracting people's attention. Rong Yu Tianlan simply leaned against a tree and watched her practice. Swoosh! A green light shot towards his face. Rong Yu Tian was stunned. Just as she was about to dodge, another green light flashed and caught up with the first light shadow. The 2 light shadows collided in the air. The first light shadow was a branch, while the second light shadow was a leaf. After the 2 light shadows collided, they immediately shattered into powder and fell to the ground. The powder was very close to Rong Yu Tianlan, and some of it directly pounced on his robe and stained his sleeves. Rong Yu Tianlan flicked his sleeves and raised his head to see Ji Xinyu standing in front of him. She frowned slightly and sized him up. "What are you doing here?" The moment the words left his mouth, he probably felt that his tone was a little harsh. He rubbed his forehead in annoyance and changed to a softer tone. "Your Highness Rong Yu, have your injuries healed?" She had started to call him His Highness Rong Yu again. She had clearly started to call him by his name earlier. Rong Yu Tian looked at her. "Xinyu, thank you." He thanked her again. Ji Xinyu couldn't help but rub her forehead. "What are you thanking me for this time?" "That wooden house is very good." Ji Xinyu waved her hand. "It was built simply and can barely block the wind and rain. You did so much for me before and got injured because of me. This is my compensation to you, Rong Yu Jun. You don't have to take it to heart." Chapter 2808. She sized him up again and said with concern, "Rong Yu Jun, I think it's better for you to quickly recuperate. The sooner you recover, the sooner we can go out. If you need anything in the next few days, just let me know. I'll help you as long as I can." She had regained her chivalrous appearance, cheerful and generous, forthright and loyal. She was no longer angry and coquettish like a little girl. Perhaps it was because she had just finished practicing martial arts, but her pretty face was flushed and her eyes were sparkling. There were even beads of sweat on her fair forehead. This kind of her made people want to hug her. Rong Yu Yishanlan suddenly looked away, nodded, and turned to leave. This person specially came over to thank her. He was really polite. The son of a noble family had a good temperament, better than his cousin. Rong Yue Tianhuan often ate and drank from her. When they went on adventures together, she had no choice but to take care of him several times, but she didn't get any thanks from him. Rong Yue Shenlin was injured because of her this time. It was reasonable for her to take care of him at this time. She didn't think there was anything wrong with that. Even if other friends were in the same situation, she would do the same. If it was Rong Yue Tianhuan, she would probably be more tired. Because that boy had always been problematic and troublesome, she wanted to beat him up. The two of them rested in the world of the Scroll of the Universe for a total of 10 days. On the morning of the 10th day, Rong Yue Shenlin walked out of the small house and saw Ji Xinyue standing not far away. In these 10 days, the two of them rarely met. Under normal circumstances, they were cultivating in their own places. Ji Xinyue never took the initiative to look for him. It was rare to see her take the initiative. Rong Yue Shenlin felt his heart skip a beat. He took 2 steps forward and asked, "Xinyue, are you looking for me?" Ji Xinyue looked at him and paused for a moment. She finally said her purpose, "Rong Yue Jun, I see that you look good. You should be almost done recuperating, right? If you're almost done, shouldn't we go out? The sooner we finish this, the sooner we can leave Misty Mountain. I still have things to do, I really can't delay any longer." So she came to urge him to go out. Rong Yue Tian felt that his brain must not be online today, because he casually asked a rather brainless question, "Are you in such a hurry to go out to see your master?" Ji Xinyue stared blankly for a moment, but didn't try to hide it. "I have to return before master's birthday." She couldn't make it in time for her master's exit ceremony, but she had to make it in time for his birthday. This master of hers was very particular about celebrating birthdays. Every time it was a birthday celebration, he would make sure that everyone was present. All of his disciples had to be present. If any of them dared not to go, getting a head full of bruises was considered a light punishment. Counting the days, there were still 5 days until her master's birthday. Even if she went out now, she would need to ride a fast horse to get there. Furthermore, she had not finished her business yet. She did not know what kind of problems the marriage pillar would give her. She might have to delay it for another 2 days. If they didn't leave now, it would really be too late. Rong Yue Tianlan paused for a moment, then turned around and left. Ji Xinyue didn't know what he was planning, so she followed him closely. "I think you should have no problem with normal movement techniques now. How about this? When we get out, I'll be in charge of clearing the path. You just need to follow behind me. If the pillar of marriage gives us a problem, I'll help you solve it." Chapter 2809. Rong Yue Shenlin suddenly stopped, and Ji Xinyue almost rushed into his arms. She hurriedly took 2 steps back and looked up at him. "Even this won't work." Rong Yue Shenlin turned and walked away again. Ji Xinyue was anxious. "Rong Yue Shenlin, what do you want? Are you afraid that you won't be able to walk out after the marriage agreement is broken? Don't worry about this, I've always helped people to the end. I'll still protect you down the mountain." Rong Yue Shenlin didn't stop walking. Ji Xinyue simply flashed and blocked his way. "Can't you at least say something? How could it not work?" This way, he would take advantage of her. Rong Yue Shenlin, who had taken advantage of her, didn't look too good. He faintly spat out a few words, "We're now walking out of this map of the universe." Ji Xinyue was speechless. She finally breathed a sigh of relief and looked around. "So you know how to get out of this map?" These few days, she had actually been studying and turning over every inch of land here, but still couldn't find a way out. She didn't expect Rong Yue Shenlin to know this. The two of them walked to the lake again. The lake had returned to its original depth, and at this moment, it was sparkling under the sunlight. Romeo Ishanlin stretched out his hand to her. Give me your hand. Ji Xinyue paused for a moment. You can just lead the way. She didn't want to have any physical contact with him now. Romeo Ishanlin looked at her. Haven't you always been indifferent to the difference between men and women? Why are you suddenly so particular now? Ji Xinyue raised her eyebrows. I've always been particular, okay? Even when she was dressed as a man, she tried not to have any physical contact with others, unless the other party was injured and had no choice. Romeo Ishanlin didn't want to argue with her about this topic anymore, so he went straight to the point. If you want to get out of this map of the universe, you have to lead one by one. And the person who opened it has to lead the way. He was the one who opened it when they came in, so naturally, he had to lead the way out. Ji Xinyue was skeptical, but there was no better way now. She made up her mind and put her small hand in his palm. Let's go. Her small hand was not as soft as other women's. There were many calluses on her palm. Romeo Ishanlin held her hand and touched the calluses on her palm. His eyes deepened slightly. When you go out, there will be a whirlpool. You will feel a little dizzy. You can close your eyes. You can also. He swallowed the rest of his words. She could also hide in his arms, he couldn't bring himself to say those words. In fact, the whirlpool when they left was even bigger than when they entered, and it spun even faster and crazier. However, Ji Xinyue kept her eyes open the entire time. She only tried her best to maintain her balance in the whirlpool, not screaming, nor did she have any intention of hiding in his embrace. Fortunately, he managed to grab hold of her in time so that they wouldn't be separated and she wouldn't be trapped in the scroll of the universe forever. It was unknown whether it was because of the explosion in the map of the universe or because it could only allow one person to enter once, but after the two of them exited the map of the universe shattered into dust. This made Ji Xinyue's heart ache for a while, and she felt that she had let down the three Qi brothers. The wraiths outside had long disappeared. Ji Xinyue landed on a mountain ridge, and she felt like she had been reborn. Perhaps it was because there were too many obstacles along the way, but the rest of their journey was very smooth. Chapter 28:10. Perhaps it was because there were too many obstacles along the way, but the rest of their journey was very smooth. They met a few small evil beasts along the way, but Ji Xinyue took care of them with a few punches and kicks. At noon, the two of them climbed over a mountain and finally saw the legendary Pillar of Marriage. It was an irregular boulder that pierced through the clouds, hidden in a cloud of white fog. Occasionally, when the wind blew, it would reveal part of its figure. There seemed to be countless names flashing on the boulder, but if one looked closely, they would not be able to see them clearly. Ji Xinyue raised her head and looked at the boulder, then took a deep breath. The boulder stood in the distance, and the top could not be seen. Looking at it from this direction, there seemed to be a boundless pressure that made people hold their breaths. That was the Pillar of Marriage. They only needed to follow the instructions of the two masters guarding Misty Mountain and imprint their blood on the Pillar of Marriage. Then, the Pillar of Marriage would naturally have a problem. As long as they could solve this problem, everything would be fine. This marriage had been entangled with her for more than 3,000 years, and now it was finally time to be free. She no longer had to bear this marriage that did not belong to her. Her heart seemed to be boiling, making her forget her fatigue. She turned in disgust with Romeo Ishanlin. Let's use light body technique to get there. We might be able to get everything done before nightfall. Romeo Ishanlin looked at the Pillar of Marriage, then looked at her sparkling eyes. His fingers tightened slightly, and he nodded, all right. Both of their light body techniques were excellent. Once they started flying, they were like shooting stars catching up with the moon. Romeo Ishanlin's light body technique was much better than Ji Xinyue's, but at this moment, for some reason, he was slightly behind. Unlike Ji Xinyue's impatience, the closer they got to the pillar of marriage, the more uneasy his heart became. It felt as if he was walking on an irreversible path of no return. He took a deep breath. He did not do anything wrong. His figure rose, and he overtook Ji Xinyue. His blue robe was like a flowing cloud as he rushed towards the mountain. Ji Xinyue looked at his back from behind, and raised her eyebrows slightly. The exalted immortal was probably anxious as well, for there was a rare aura of hostility emanating from his body. From time to time, the animals that appeared in the forest to attack them were all killed by him, and were sent flying with a wave of his sleeve. Those who were smashed to pieces, and those who were thrown to their deaths. His appearance was as if he was possessed by the god of death, and the ferocious beasts along the way no longer dared to come forward. When they saw him rushing over, they hurriedly fled. Rather than calling the pillar of marriage a pillar, it would be more accurate to call it a straight white jade mountain peak. Ji Xinyue stood under the pillar and raised her head to look at it. She couldn't help but praise the magnificence of this pillar in her heart. She glanced at Rongyu Yishenlin who was standing beside her. Perhaps it was because he had run too fast, but his face was slightly pale. At this moment, he was staring at the pillar without moving. "Shall we begin?" Ji Xinyu spoke first, pulling out a crescent-shaped blade. This was also given to them by the two emissaries at the foot of the mountain. They could only use this knife to draw blood. "All right." Rong Yuetian seemed to have woken up from a dream. He responded and took out his scimitar. Both of them cut their palms, and then pressed their bleeding palms onto the pillar of marriage. After a moment, the pillar of marriage shook slightly. The originally hazy words on it spun wildly, and slowly, two names appeared on the pillar. Rongyu Yishenlin, Ji Xinyue. Chapter 28:11. Rongyu Yishenlin, Ji Xinyue. These two names were pure gold, shining brightly side by side. In the middle of the names, there was a symbol of a heart-linking lock, as if they were a loving couple standing side by side. As the blood of the two merged, another line of words appeared under the names. 1,000 years of cultivation led to crossing the same boat, 10,000 years of cultivation led to sleeping on the same pillow. Do the two of you want to break up this hard-won good karma? In front of the two of them, the words yes and no appeared respectively. They could choose. Ji Xinyue didn't hesitate and pressed his bloody finger on the yes button. Rongyu Yishenlin's face was slightly pale, his finger pressed on the pillar for a long time without pressing it. Ji Xinyue glanced at him. "What's wrong? Hurry up and press it." Both of them had to choose yes before the palm could be moved and the bleeding stopped. What was the meaning of him being distracted at this time? Rongyu Yishenlin took a deep breath, raised his finger, and pressed the yes button. A faint sigh came from the marriage pillar, but it was very vague, not much different from the sound of the mountain wind blowing. Ji Xinyue didn't hear it at all, but Rongyu Yishenlin's body stiffened slightly. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the sound. But he didn't see anything. According to the experience of the seniors who had successfully annulled their marriages here, after this process was completed, the marriage pillar would give the two people an extremely difficult question. They could either kill a monster, break through a maze, or enter an illusion. These difficult questions varied according to the level of the person who entered. The higher the level of the martial arts, the more perverted the challenge. Once the challenge was successful, the engagement would naturally be broken. If the challenge failed, sorry, but leave your life. Whoever failed would have to leave their life here, and the other party would be free. Of course, in the difficult problem of breaking off the engagement, one party could also help the other, but if they failed, the two of them would die here. Every senior who talked about the challenges here had a lingering fear. They didn't want to experience it a second time in their lives. Rongyu Yishenlin had already asked around, but he felt that there was no challenge that could really stump him. Martial arts, wisdom, zither, chess, calligraphy, painting, array formation, medical skills, planting trees and raising beasts, he was the best in all of them. According to him, except for the fact that he didn't know how to give birth, he was an expert in everything else. He even knew a little about witchcraft. Under such circumstances, what else could stop him? He even made up his mind to help Ji Xinyu as soon as he succeeded. He did want to break off the engagement with her, but he never wanted her to die. He had made all the preparations, but the marriage pillar gave him a reaction that he had never expected. As he pressed the word yes, the heart-linking lock that connected the names of the two people on the pillar of marriage broke silently. Then, he watched as the two names flew in opposite directions and disappeared into the pillar. This was the sign of a successful annulment. Rong Yuetian stood there, unable to react for a moment. He succeeded just like that. The marriage pillar didn't give them any problems, and simply annulled their marriage contract so crudely. It was too smooth. It went so smoothly that no one dared to believe it was real. After pressing yes, Ji Xinyu took a step back and patiently waited for the pillar of marriage to give her a difficult question. At this moment, when he saw the scene, he was also stunned. He blinked his eyes and said, "This is a sign of success, right? You're not coming up with any more questions." Chapter 28:12. Rongyue Tianlan also took a step back, looked up at the marriage pillar, and answered Ji Xinyu, "Probably." "So good." Ji Xinyue's eyes curved, and her small mouth curled up. "Looks like we're lucky to have encountered such a rare opportunity." She paused again. "Looks like we're really not meant to be. Even the marriage pillar didn't think highly of us, so it could be resolved so easily." Rongyue Tianlan choked, the joy in her eyes made him a little uncomfortable. He turned his eyes and looked at the marriage pillar again. He felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what it was. The marriage pillar returned to its original appearance, and his and her names could no longer be seen. And the only connection between them was completely broken. As the two names disappeared, the fog in Misty Mountain also dissipated. Ji Xinyu felt a warm flow into her body. She moved her arms and legs. "Hey, my telekinesis has recovered." Yes, the marriage between her and him had already disappeared, so the taboo of the Misty Mountain had also disappeared. This was the real sign of the successful dissolution of the marriage. "Rong Yuejun, I have something to do, so I'll take my leave first." "Goodbye." Ji Xinyu was eager to return home. She cupped her fists at Rongyue Tianlan, turned around, and wanted to fly away. Rongyue Tianlan was quick to react, and pulled her back. "Wait." "Ha?" Ji Xinyu raised her eyebrows. "Is there anything else, Rong Yuejun?" Rongyue Tianlan took a deep breath. "You can't use your telekinesis yet, I'll send you out." Without waiting for Ji Xinyu to object, he grabbed her by the waist and flew down the mountain at lightning speed. Ji Xinyu was speechless. Ji Xinyu naturally knew what he meant by, "can't use telekinesis yet," and struggled in his arms. "My injuries are almost healed, don't worry so much." Rongyue Tianlan's arms were like iron hoops, and she couldn't move. His tone was also light. "You just need to be careful for 3 more days. Do you really want that fish scale to be with you forever?" The faint plum fragrance on his body made Ji Xinyu feel annoyed for no reason. She and he were not even engaged anymore, so how could they continue to hug each other like this? Besides, there were many new wounds on her body. Even if the scars on the old wounds disappeared, the new wounds would still leave scars. It was unnecessary for her to care about this. "It's just fish scales. It's not a big deal. It wasn't like he would die. I don't mind. Ji Shinyu tried to reason with him. You may not care, but I do. This sentence almost slipped out of her mouth. Rong Yuetian pursed her lips slightly and said faintly, girls should cherish themselves. This way, others will cherish you. Don't worry, I will only send you to the foot of the mountain. I will only let you down when we leave the mountain gate. Rong Yuetian, I don't want to owe you anything anymore. Ji Shinyu was a little angry. She raised her hand and wanted to slap him away. Rong Yuetian's sleeve brushed against her body, causing Ji Shinyu's body to stiffen slightly. Damn it, she couldn't move. Ji Shinyu glared at him and opened her mouth, but no words came out. Ever since she finished her apprenticeship, this was the first time she was restrained like this. It was also the first time someone restrained her so frequently that she couldn't move. I owe you. Rong Yuetian's voice was faint. Let me help you one last time. One last time, all right. Ji Shinyu pursed her lips and froze in his arms. The Supreme Immortal's thinking was indeed different from normal people. She felt that she didn't understand him anymore. Chapter 28:13. Forget it. Since she was already here, she might as well take things as they came. This was probably the last time she would meet him, so she didn't need to care so much about it. Her waist was slender and soft. Wrapped around his arm, it was as if the size was just right and they fit perfectly. Ji Shinyu tried to raise her body as high as possible to prevent her chest from touching him. Rong Yuetian naturally noticed her small movements, but when she leaned back like this, her chest was even more perky. As long as he lowered his eyes, he would be able to see the small mounds under her clothes. Rong Yuetian's mind was shaken, her lower abdomen heated up, and her eyes suddenly moved away. He cursed in his heart. For the first time in his life, he felt desire. The environment in which Rong Yuetian grew up was also a little special. He grew up in the palace, and what he saw the most were the palace fights between the women. They used all kinds of means, and such beautiful women would make their faces hideous in order to compete for favor and status. This caused him to have some psychological trauma towards women since he was young. He was born with a handsome face, and he was even more handsome when he was young. Anyone who saw her would want to hug her. Among them were his father's concubines, and there were even some who had designs on him. When he was young, he had been molested by a concubine. Although he had detected it in time and had not been successfully molested by the concubine, he had almost lost his reputation because of it. Because of this, he had a deeper shadow over women. He had the illusion that women were tigers, and he even had an instinctive disgust towards the matters between men and women. Later on, when he ventured out into the world, he got to know some other women. His impression of women changed slightly, but the shadow of his childhood was deeply ingrained and could not be removed in a short period of time. Then, there was this forced engagement incident. He was forced to leave his hometown. After wandering in the space-time turbulence for a while, he finally settled down in the Tian-Ci continent. He cultivated the Tao of Immortals, which purified his heart and abstinence of desires, and he was a little traumatized by women. Therefore, although he attracted the gazes of countless beauties when he walked through the three realms, he was able to walk through thousands of flowers without a single leaf touching him. Other than a few close female friends that he had made regardless of gender, he had never really been moved by any woman. Of course, she had never fallen in love with him. He had a wide range of interests, but he was not interested in the relationship between men and women. Later, he got to know Shinjuli, who had the least desire. Shinjuli often came to his island to eat and drink, and even occasionally enslaved him and made him run errands for him. However, Shinjuli still regarded him as a true friend. Intentionally or unintentionally, Shinjuli also taught him some martial arts, which benefited him a lot. The Almighty had many tricks up his sleeves. There was nothing he couldn't get. Rong Yu Tianlan liked to refine treasures, so he lacked a lot of raw materials. As long as he asked the great god would always think of a way to get it for him. Rong Yuetian had always thought that although he and the great god had different temperaments, they were the same kind of people. They were immortals with the most celestial aura. She didn't expect that the Almighty would be so deeply in love with her that he was hovering between life and death. Although Rong Yu Tianlan had never been in love before, he still understood women. He had also read a lot of love stories. He wasn't as pure as the auntie, so he could be the great god's counselor in love. He gave him a lot of bad ideas. The great god loved for 3 lifetimes, and then flew away with his wife. This made Rong Yu Tianlan quite envious. Only then did he start to face his own problems. When he dreamed in the middle of the night, he even wondered if he would also get a soul-stirring romantic love. Chapter 28:14. He had high expectations for love, so even though he had met countless women, he had never been moved by any of them. Of course, he had never fallen in love. For cultivators like him, his self-control was extraordinarily strong, and he had almost never had any physical desires. But now, he was hugging Ji Xinyu, who had broken off the engagement, and he had an indescribable desire. He had the urge to kiss her fiercely. He already had someone in his heart. He had loved that person so much that he could die for her. Now, he had fallen in love with another person. If Shinjiuli knew about this, he would definitely despise him. The Almighty loved someone for 3 lifetimes, and it had never changed. But he had changed after loving for 1 lifetime, and was attracted to another woman. How could he face Ji Yu, who had died tragically for him? Not to mention others, even he despised himself for being a scum. If Ning Xuemon knew about this, he reckoned that she would directly label him as a scumbag. Rong Yu Tianlan closed his eyes and took a deep breath to calm himself down. Ji Xinyu, who was in his arms, suddenly started to struggle. Even though her acupoints had been sealed, she did not struggle much, but he still sensed it. He glanced at her, only to see her hurriedly mouthing 2 words to him. Rong Yu Tianlan did not react for a moment. What? Ji Xinyu could not say it, and in a hurry, she turned her head to look in a direction. Rong Yu Tianlan also looked in that direction subconsciously. His expression changed. He was too distracted, and did not see that there was a big tree in front of him, and he was running straight towards it. He was flying very fast, and was less than a meter away from the tree. It was too late to dodge, but if he ran over like this, Ji Xinyu, who was in his arms, would be flattened. In this crisis, he had no time to think, and his body turned abruptly. Bang! With a loud sound, his back hit the big tree. The big tree could not withstand his thunderous impact, and with a crack, it snapped, and the upper half of the tree flew out. Rong Yu Tianlan also almost fell out. Fortunately, his martial arts were not bad, and after a few steps, he finally stabilized himself. Ji Xinyu's face was filled with a "Are you possessed by something? How can you bump into a tree while walking?" expression. Rong Yu Tianlan's back was burning. She knew that this hit was not light. However, this situation was too embarrassing. He did not want to explain, so he coughed and said, "My psychokinesis has just recovered. I'm still not used to it." He then looked down at her and asked subconsciously, "Are you okay? Did you hit anything?" Ji Xinyu. She had been protected in his arms just now and hadn't been touched at all. At most, she had only been shaken a little. Of course, she was fine, but wasn't he the one who was in trouble? He had used so much strength to crash into it. If it were an ordinary immortal, they would have been killed instantly. Ji Xinyu actually really wanted to see his back, but she was currently in his embrace and couldn't turn around to look at his back, so she could only give up. Fortunately, Rongyu Tianlan took her flying again. This time, the flight was very stable, so Ji Xinyu did not take it to heart. When Ji Xinyu came out from the entrance of Misty Mountain, she paused when she saw the scene in the valley. There were rows of tents in the valley, big and small, with different specifications, sizes, and colors. Chapter 28:15. The most eye-catching ones were 3 of them. One was light pink with a soft pink color. It was obvious that it was the tent of a noble girl. There was also a sky blue tent inlaid with countless gems. It looked like it was inlaid with countless stars. It should be the tent of a king. There was also a snow-white tent in the middle. It was like a crane and a flock of chickens. There was a huge pearl on top of the tent that shone faintly in the night. However, before Ji Xinyu could see the layout of the valley clearly, she was surrounded. The first to rush up were the 3 Qi brothers. The moment Ji Xinyu popped her head out, the first thing she heard was them shouting, "Boss! Boss is out! It's the princess!" The shouting third young Master Qi was kicked by first young Master Qi. Second young Master Qi's eyes were almost brimming with tears. "I told you, the princess and the others would be fine. They were just delayed, now they're finally out." The 3 brothers' enthusiasm moved Ji Xinyu. She was about to say something. Shwa! Someone jumped down from the tree, pushing the 3 brothers to the side. It was Chang Bubai. "Princess, are you hurt?" Ji Xinyu shook her head. "I'm fine, Xinyu. This king knew you would come out. This king didn't wait in vain." The sky blue tent's curtain was lifted. The western sky prince Shi Shuangqing walked over with a smile. "Did you succeed?" Ji Xinyu didn't expect that after so many days, they were still waiting here. Her heart was slightly warm, but she also had a headache. The 3 Qi brothers and Chang Bubai were fine, but this Shi Shuangqing obviously had some plans for her. Now he was looking at her with a smile, his eyes full of gratification and friendship. It made the veins on Ji Xinyu's forehead twitch. "Sister." A pink-clothed figure rushed over and grabbed Ji Xinyu's sleeve. "Sister, you're finally out. I was worried to death. You're a full 10 days later than the scheduled date. Did you encounter any danger? Annulling the marriage, did it go smoothly? Where's brother Rongyu? Why didn't he come out with you?" Ji Tianyue fired a series of questions like a cannonball. Her big eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. She had lost a lot of weight in just over 10 days. She used to have a little baby fat, but with her slim chin, her eyes looked even bigger and more watery. Ji Xinyu calmly pulled back her sleeve. "Rong Yuejun is in the back, he'll be out soon. You go wait for him." Pushing her aside, she walked out. The others naturally followed her and asked her a lot of questions. Ji Tianyue was left hanging there. Ji Tianyue stood in place, startled. Although she was a little embarrassed, she could tell from Ji Xinyu's words that the marriage had been successfully annulled. Brother Rongyu is free. Brother Rongyu was about to come out. Then she would be the first to welcome him and let him see her first. She waited directly at the entrance of the mountain without blinking. Ji Xinyu was anxious to see her master, so she casually answered a few questions from the people around her, then cupped her fists to them. "Thank you for your concern, Xinyu can't thank you enough, but Xinyu has an urgent matter to attend to and needs to return to the Purple Clouds sect, so forgive Xinyu for taking her leave." After finishing his speech, he was about to fly up on his sword when he raised his head and saw the snow-white tent. He stopped abruptly and looked carefully at the appearance of the tent. He blurted out, "Master." Chapter 28:16. This tent actually belonged to her master, sect leader Zi Yun. The snow-white tent's curtain was lifted, and a man in a white robe walked out. He had handsome eyebrows and looked rather cold and aloof. Just by standing there, he had the aura of a great master. Behind him were 9 other disciples of Ziyun sect. Although their appearances were different, from their expressions and bearing, they were all experts. When these people came out, it was as if an auspicious aura had spread throughout the valley. Ji Xinyu's eyes widened. After being stunned for a moment, she strode forward. Master, senior brother. Her master had actually brought all of her senior and junior brothers here. Not a single one was left out. This was too surprising. She immediately went forward to greet them. The man in the white robe was her master, sect leader Ziyun. He raised his hand and pulled his disciple in front of him. Come here, let me see if you're injured. Her master actually came to see her in person, which made Ji Xinyu feel flattered. Of course, she was also very happy. In order to reassure her master, she stood up and turned in a circle. Master, I'm fine. Look, I'm still as lively as ever. Her steps were light, and when she turned in a circle, her clothes fluttered as if she was about to fly. She really didn't look like she was injured. Her senior and junior brothers all laughed. Master, we said that your worries were unnecessary. With little junior sister's strong martial arts, a mere misty mountain won't be a problem for her. Yes, little junior sister is blessed by the heavens, nothing will happen to her. Senior sister's martial arts are top-notch. Even if this misty mountain is 100 times more dangerous, senior sister can still come and go as she pleases. Right, junior sister, after master came out of seclusion and heard that you hadn't come out yet, he rushed over without saying anything. If it wasn't for the rule that outsiders are not allowed to enter the mountain, I'm afraid that master would have rushed into the mountain to find you. These few days, master has been unable to sit still because of you. Ji Xinyu's senior brother Feng Wuji couldn't help but sigh. Little junior sister, why were you inside for so long? If master didn't see that your life was not in danger because your life was not in danger, I'm afraid that everyone would be worried to death. Because your life is unknown, master didn't even organize a birthday banquet. No matter where Grandmaster Ziyun went, he would always pay attention to his style. After he came out, he casually summoned a chair and sat on it. His disciples surrounded Ji Xinyu and talked to him one after another, but he didn't interrupt. He only rested his chin on his hand and looked coldly at this female disciple of his who was the most skilled in martial arts but also the most troublesome. His gaze made Ji Xinyu's hair stand. Master didn't want others to say that he was old, but he took his birthday very seriously. Every year, he would hold a grand celebration, but this time, because of her, although her master didn't say anything, the way he looked at her made her feel that there was a lot of resentment. Ji Xinyu immediately took out a blue pearl and handed it over with both hands. Master, look, this is your disciple's gift to you. Grandmaster Ziyun's eyes lit up slightly. He finally straightened his body and stretched out his hand to receive the pearl. He twirled it around his fingertips. The fate-revealing pearl shone brightly, blinding the eyes of the surrounding disciples. Everyone congratulated their master in unison. Feng Wuji couldn't help but pat Ji Xinyu's shoulder. Little junior sister, you really are capable. You even found such a treasure in the Misty Mountain just to cancel the engagement. Another disciple also laughed. Little junior sister, you didn't come out for so long, was it because of this pearl? Chapter 28:17. Ji Xinyue smiled and nodded. Although she had found this pearl by accident, the reason why she had been delayed was because of this pearl. Sister, why hasn't brother Rongyue come out yet? Is he seriously injured? If you want to break off the engagement, why do you still need to pick the pearl? Ji Tianyue suddenly rushed over from the entrance of the valley, her face full of anxiety. Ji Xinyue frowned slightly and looked back at the entrance of the valley. Indeed, Rongyue Tianlan had not come out. Logically speaking, he should have come out. At that time, he carried her and flew near the entrance of the valley, then put her down, saying that he wanted to separate from her and let her go first. She thought that he was probably avoiding suspicion, so she didn't say much and came out first. She had been out for almost a quarter of an hour. Why hadn't he come out yet? Was he trying to avoid suspicion even more thoroughly? Ji Xinhue didn't want to pay attention to her sister, but Ji Tianyue was probably used to being spoiled by her. At this time, she was a little unforgiving. She tugged at her sleeve and opened her big round eyes. "Sister, say something, why hasn't Brother Rongyue come out yet?" Ji Xinhue frowned slightly. She was a little embarrassed for her sister to ask about her future brother-in-law in public. She was about to tug at her sleeve when her 9th junior brother Xia Fenglu suddenly smiled at Ji Tianyue and waved, "Tianyue, come here." Xia Fenglu had an extremely likable baby face, smiling all day long. He looked like a good-tempered Maitreya Buddha, but unknowingly, he liked to trip people up. Jianghu people called him the Smiling Tiger. He had entered Nantian Palace with Ji Xinhue a few times and had seen Ji Tianyue a few times. He even played with her and gave her some fun things. Ji Tianyue was still not on guard against him, so she ran over. "Brother Xia." Xia Fenglu raised his hand and rubbed her head to show his affection. "Tianyue, you're also very worried about your brother Rongyue?" Ji Tianyue nodded. "Yes, very worried." Xia Fenglu blinked. "Then if Brother Xia enters Misty Mountain, will little Tianyue also be very worried?" Ji Tianyue paused for a moment and replied with some reluctance, I'm also worried." Xia Fenglu looked a little sad. The word "also" makes Brother Xia sad. Then in little Tianyu's heart, who is better, Brother Xia or Brother Rongyu? Which one do you prefer? Ji Tianyue choked. This, a good child shouldn't lie. Even if Brother Xia is sad, I hope you can tell me the truth, Xia Fenglu said sincerely. I like Brother Rongyu more. Ji Tianyue's voice trailed off. Then what do you like about Brother Rongyue? Speaking of this, Ji Tianyue's eyes lit up. Brother Rongyue's martial arts is the best. Brother Rongyu is the most handsome. Brother Rongyu is the most popular, all the girls in the continent want to marry him. Then little Tianyu also wants to marry Brother Rongyu. Ji Tianyue blushed. I'm still young, so you're saying that little Tianyu doesn't want to marry Brother Rongyu? No. Little Tianyu also wants to marry Brother Rongyu. Little Tianyu already knows how to like people at such a young age. Come, tell Brother Xia, when did you start to like Brother Rongyu? Ji Tianyue tilted her head and thought for a moment. Her face turned red again. Since Brother Rongyu entered Nantian Palace, I liked him at first sight. Chapter 28:18. She was such an honest child. Xia Fenglu smiled and squinted his eyes. So you already liked him at that time. But at that time, he was still your brother-in-law. There's no such thing as sisters sharing a husband in the Fanine continent. So, you already wanted to steal a man from your third sister who loved you the most, right? The last sentence could be said to be malicious, but it also revealed the truth of the Fanine continent. Ji Tianyue was stunned for a moment, then she pursed her lips. Third sister wanted to break off the engagement with Brother Rongyue, so I didn't steal, but when you fell in love with him, your third sister hadn't broken off the engagement with him yet. At that time, your imperial father wanted to facilitate their marriage, right? Ji Tianyue was tongue-tied. Your third sister was so good to you. She wanted to give you all the good things and treated you so well. Is this how you schemed against your third sister? Little Tianyue, you're so young, but your skin is so thick. Is your heart so black? Ji Tianyue didn't expect that brother Xia, who was always kind and cheerful to her, would reprimand her with such direct words. She was stunned for a moment, and her little face turned green and white. I didn't. I didn't. You didn't what? You didn't scheme against your third sister? Or you didn't fall in love with your third brother-in-law? Xia Fenglu pressed on. I didn't scheme against third sister. Brother Rongyue is not third brother-in-law. Ji Tianyue finally choked out a sentence. Little Tianyue, being thick-skinned is a good thing. I think as a princess, you should have this. You deliberately spread the news when Rongyue Tianlan was still your third brother-in-law, so that everyone would think that he came with you. You cried and made a scene in the palace, begging the South Heaven Emperor to help you and Rongyue Tianlan. You made the South Heaven Emperor force your third sister to break off the engagement. Wasn't this your scheme? Xia Fenglu had obviously investigated, and his words were sharper than the previous. Xia Fenglu exposed what Ji Tianyue had done in public. There were still many people present, and many of them did not know the inside story. Now that they heard Xia Fenglu's words, everyone's eyes focused on Ji Tianyue. Ji Tianyue didn't expect brother Xia, who had always been gentle to her, who had brought her out to play a few times, and who would even stand up for her when she was bullied outside, to turn hostile today. After being stunned for a moment, she burst into tears. You bully me. Bullying a child. You've always been nice to me, but it turns out that it was all fake. Her crying was like a pear blossom in the rain. Originally, as long as she cried like this in the palace, almost everyone would serve her and feel sorry for her. Even Xia Fenglu back then was no exception. When she cried, he would coax her and even help her hit the person who made her cry. But now, Xia Fenglu stood there with his arms crossed. He was completely immune to her crying. Hearing her accusation, he smiled. Naturally, no one will bully a cute child. A child playing tricks in front of an adult is really asking for a beating. Also, little Tianyue, you have to understand one thing. Originally, my kindness to you was not fake, it was all real. But that was because of your third sister's face. I will only treat people who she treats sincerely. If it's just you, do you think you have the qualifications to be treated sincerely by me? Ji Tianyue, the people around them burst into laughter. Among them, the three Qi brothers laughed the loudest. Chapter 28:19. Third young Master Qi gave her a thumbs up, well said. Ji Tianyu's face turned even redder. She had always been pampered by others all her life. She could get whatever she wanted. She had never been mocked like this before. And she had never been watched like this before. Xia Fenglu's words were like stripping her naked in front of everyone, causing her to feel extremely embarrassed. She was still young after all, so she could not think of any words to refute Xia Fenglu. Furthermore, none of the people around her spoke up for her. This was the first time she had fallen into such a helpless situation. Her large eyes turned anxiously and landed on Ji Shenyu. She could not help but want to seek protection from her. Third sister, can you bear to let them bully your little sister like this? Ji Shenyu frowned slightly. Her little sister's skin was really thick. She still wanted to ask her for help at a time like this. Did she really think that she was a punching bag who only knew how to pamper her little sister? Before she could say anything, Sect Master Ziyun spoke up. Shenyu, were you injured in the mountains? Were you bullied? His handsome face darkened again. I know that you are a competitive girl and like to swallow your pride. But now that your master and senior brothers are all here, you don't have to endure it anymore. Speak up and your master will make the decision for you. Ji Shinyu felt warmth in her heart. Only in the sect could she receive so much love and care. However, she did not want her master to worry, so she smiled. I'm really fine. Master, your disciple is so capable. How could I be bullied? It's already good enough that I don't bully others. Also, the engagement this time was cancelled quite smoothly. After we arrived at the marriage pillar, we only needed to click on the option and the engagement was cancelled. There wasn't even a test. This shows that we are really not suitable for each other. Even the marriage pillar went easy on us. This topic attracted the attention of everyone present. When they heard that the marriage pillar went easy on them, everyone was very surprised and expressed that they had never heard of it before. However, Sect Master Ziyun frowned slightly and asked Ji Shinyu to explain the situation. There was no need to hide such things, so Ji Shinyu told him everything. Before Grandmaster Ziyun could say anything, the fat and thin walkers who were guarding the door suddenly interrupted. You said your name and his is golden on the pillar of marriage. And not silver. Are you sure? Ji Shinyu nodded. That's right, it's shiny. She raised her eyebrows in surprise. There's a silver one. The fat and thin walkers looked at each other, and the fat walker said, it can be said that almost everyone's name is silver, and very few have golden names. The thin walker also said, this has nothing to do with the depth of one's cultivation. Back then, there was a high immortal who went in. His and his wife's names were also silver. Ji Shinyu was stunned. What's with the golden color? Is there any explanation? The fat walker said, only a marriage destined by the heavens is golden. If the golden one wanted to break off the engagement, the pillar of marriage would not give a test. It was completely up to the person involved. They were considered a couple protected by the pillar of marriage. Out of billions of people, you won't meet a pair. The thin walker also added, however, there is a fatal flaw in this kind of marriage. People who have this kind of marriage are extremely in love with each other. They can have 3 lifetimes of love. However, once the engagement is broken, the 3 lifetimes of love will be cut off. It will be difficult to get back together again. The fat walker shook his head and said, that's right. Although it's easy to cancel a marriage arranged by heaven, getting back together is the most difficult. It's almost impossible. Chapter 28:20. Is it easy to reconcile with the silver runes? Someone asked. It's difficult. Marriage is not child's play, it's not a child's game for you to break up and get back together. Otherwise, it would lack the solemnity and holiness of the marriage pillar. However, the person with the silver runes is an ordinary person after all, the marriage pillar doesn't really care. As long as there's enough sincerity, it's not too difficult for 2 people who have broken off the engagement to reconcile. There have been many successful examples over the years. Once a marriage destined by heaven is broken off, it's a contempt for heaven's will. If you want to reconcile, it's going against heaven's will. Since ancient times, I've never heard of anyone succeeding. The fat walker looked at Ji Shinyu regretfully. Originally, I thought that you and His Highness Rongyu were quite compatible. I even looked forward to the day you 2 reconciled. Now, it seems that you and His Highness Rongyu are not fated. Ji Shinyu smiled and said, fortunately, I've never thought of reconciling with him. I don't have to worry about this. Before she finished speaking, she suddenly paused and her gaze fell on the entrance of the valley. At the entrance of the valley, Rongyu Tianlan was floating there. He was leaning against the stone wall and tapping the fan in his palm. He looked very free and easy, but his face was a little pale. No one knew when he came out, and no one knew how long he had been listening there. Brother Rongyu. Ji Tianyu finally saw him. As if she saw her savior, she cried out happily and pounced on him. Her figure was like a swallow returning to the forest. Rong Yu Tianlan's eyes moved slightly. He gently raised his folding fan, and Ji Tianyu's body stopped in front of him, unable to take another step forward. Brother Rong Yu. Ji Tianyu looked at him with grievance. She actually wanted to jump into his arms so that she could declare her sovereignty in front of everyone. However, Rong Yu Tianlan obviously had no such intention. She had never touched his arms before. Fortunately, although Rong Yu Tianlan did not let her hug him, his gaze was still gentle. You've been waiting here? Ji Tianyu nodded. Yes, I was waiting for Brother Rong Yu to come out. I didn't dare to leave. She pointed to the pink tent not far away. That's Tianyu's. Rong Yu Tianlan glanced at the tent and nodded slightly. Pack your things, I'll send you back. Ji Tianyu's eyes lit up. Brother Rong Yue, are you using the unicorn carriage to send Tianyue back? Rong Yue Tian responded with an aha. Quickly go and pack your things. Ji Tianyu's eyes sparkled as she looked around at the people around her. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something and pulled Rong Yue Tianlan's sleeve aggrievedly. Brother Rong Yue, someone bullied me just now. You have to avenge me. When she said this, everyone present looked at each other in dismay. Most of the people were still a little afraid of Rong Yue Tianlan, an exalted immortal. Therefore, when his gaze swept over them, those who had once mocked Ji Tianyue took a few steps back guiltily. Of course, there were also those who were not afraid of anything. For example, the Qi clan's third young master, Chang Bubai, and the people from the Purple Cloud sect. Ji Xinyu frowned slightly, but she didn't say anything. She crossed her arms and looked on coldly as if it had nothing to do with her. Although Rong Yu Yishanlan came out late and didn't see the scene at that time, he could roughly guess it based on everyone's reaction. He nodded and motioned for Ji Tianyue to continue. Ji Tianyue finally found the backstage and recounted the scene to him in full detail. When I finished speaking, my tears flowed out again. Chapter 28-21. In the end, tears flowed out again. They bullied me just now. Even my sister didn't speak up for Tianyue. Rongyu Yishanlan looked at Xie Fenglu indifferently. Xie Fenglu looked back with a smile. His eyes were sharp. Yes, I did say that about her. But I don't think I said anything wrong. Since you did it, you shouldn't be afraid of others talking about it. Does Your Highness Rongyu Yishanlan think that she did the right thing? Rongyu Yishanlan said indifferently, I don't think she did the right thing, but she's still a child, a spoiled child. Your Excellency shouldn't use such sharp words on her. Xie Fenglu smiled. His words were sharp enough. From your tone, it seems that you're really protecting her. It seems that this Princess Tianyue isn't a one-sided person. Are you really going to abandon your sister and marry her sister? Ji Tianyue's eyes lit up. She put the complaint aside. She also wanted to hear Rongyu Yishanlan give her an answer. If Rongyu Yishanlan admitted his feelings for her in front of so many people, then their marriage would be set in stone. The people around were also waiting for Rongyu Yishanlan's answer. There were still many people who thought that even if Rongyu Yishanlan broke off the engagement with Ji Xinyu, he might not be interested in her sister. After all, the little girl was still too young and underage. Rongyu Yishanlan smiled. His expression did not change. He only said a few words. Everything is possible. After leaving such a thought-provoking sentence, he knocked on Ji Tianyue's shoulder with his fan. Be good, don't dawdle, go pack your things, I'll send you back. A little girl shouldn't always run around outside, it's very dangerous. This sentence was already filled with concern. Ji Tianyue indeed hurried to pack her tent. Rongyu Yishanlan raised his hand, pinched a spell, and flicked his finger towards the sky. A blue light shot straight into the sky. After a moment, two clear and long cries sounded in the sky. the two unique carriages pulled by the two unicorns appeared in the sky and landed on the ground in the blink of an eye. Ji Tianyue naturally had her attendants. However, in order to let Rongyue Tianlan help her and show off their affection in front of others, she had ordered the attendants to leave the valley as soon as Ji Shenyu came out. Now, Rongyu Tianlan had asked her to clean up these things herself. After all, she had never done these things before, so she cleaned up in a mess. Because he was too anxious, his head was almost hit by the falling tent. After Rongyue Tianlan summoned her mount, she turned around and saw her like this. The corners of her lips couldn't help but twitch as she waved her folding fan. It was as if a pair of invisible hands were tidying up the tent. In the blink of an eye, it was tidied up neatly. His voice sounded faintly, "Get on the carriage first. Tell your guards to take the tent and luggage back." Ji Tianyue. Okay. She blushed. How did Brother Rongyue know that I brought guards? She thought that as long as she appeared here alone, Rongyue Tianlan wouldn't know. Was there even a need to guess? She was so clumsy when she was packing her luggage. It was obvious that she was a delicate young lady who was waiting for someone to serve her. If she had been waiting here alone, the tent would have been turned into a pigsty by her. How could it still be so clean and tidy? Rongyue Tianlan was too lazy to answer such an idiotic question. He turned around, got on the carriage first, and said 3 words, "Get on." Ji Tianyue got on the carriage with a red face. She looked at Rongyue Tianlan, who was sitting outside the carriage, and subconsciously wanted to sit beside him. Chapter 28-22. Tianyue, go inside and sit. Rongyu Ishanlan frowned and stopped her. But I want to sit beside Big Brother Rongyue. Ji Tianyue pouted. It's windy outside, you won't be able to stand it. Be a good girl and go inside. Rongyu Ishanlan's words were gentle, but her actions were forceful. She did not leave any space for Ji Tianyue. Ji Tianyue felt that Rongyu Ishanlan's aura was a little cold, but she did not dare to disobey. She obediently agreed, okay, Tianyue knows that Big Brother Rongyue dotes on me. Tianyue will be obedient. After saying that, she glanced at Ji Shenyu proudly. However, Ji Shenyu didn't even look at them. She was busy helping her master pack up the tent. Her hands were nimble, and the tent was folded neatly in a short while. The things inside were also organized neatly, and it looked exceptionally pleasing to the eye. The Purple Cloud sect master looked very satisfied. He put a hand on his disciple's shoulder and said, "Seeing that you gave me a fate bead, I won't pursue the matter of you delaying my birthday. Follow me back to the Purple Cloud sect next." It was rare that her master was not fussy this time. Ji Shenyu also heaved a sigh of relief. She did not dare to push away her master's hand and said, "Master's birthday is the most important thing in the world. Master, there are still 5 days to your birthday. Why don't you let your disciple prepare one for you?" The Purple Cloud sect master could not be more satisfied. He simply put his whole arm on his disciple's shoulder and said, "Very good, I knew that our Shenyu is the most capable. Then help me into the carriage." He raised his hand, and a super flashy carriage appeared out of thin air. The whole carriage was made of deep-sea tortoiseshell, and a cloud pattern was inlaid on it with southern sea purple pearl. On the roof of the carriage stood a lifelike red-crowned crane carved out of an unknown material. It was as if it could fly down from the roof of the carriage and dance with just a breath of air. The beast pulling the carriage was even more flashy. It was actually a snow-white dragon. At this moment, Rongyu Ishanlan's carriage had not left yet. The 2 carriages were parked in the south and north, facing the wind. No matter whether it was the grandeur or the luxurious level, it was actually the same, stunning everyone below. Everyone knew that the Purple Cloud sect was rich, but they didn't expect it to be this rich. Shi Shuangqing originally wanted to invite Ji Shenyu to ride with him, as he felt that his own carriage would not disgrace Ji Shenyu's status. However, when he saw Grandmaster Zi Yun's carriage, he felt a little ashamed of his own inferiority. He couldn't bring himself to say any more words of invitation. However, he had traveled a long and arduous journey to this place, so he naturally did not want to return empty-handed. He hurriedly took a step forward and said, "Shenyu, this little king will pay a visit to the Nantian Palace in a few days. At that time, we will be able to meet again. Unfortunately, I am not familiar with the Nantian clan. I wonder if Princess Shenyu can spare some time to accompany this little king for a stroll around the Nantian clan." Ji Shenyu didn't say anything, but Xia Fenglu, who was beside her, narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Does the Twin Cities Prince want to go to Nantian Palace to propose marriage? Have you taken a fancy to my senior sister?" This question was too direct. Shi Shuangqing paused for a moment, but he didn't deny it. "Yes, Princess Shenyu is now a free woman. A gentleman would love to have a fair and graceful woman. I happen to be unmarried." Xia Fenglu raised his eyebrows and interrupted him. "Unmarried? I heard that you, little prince, have 8 wives by your side. How could that be? I only have 2 servants by my side." At this point, Shi Shuangqing's words suddenly stopped. Chapter 28-23. His 2 maidservants had always been secretly raised in the residence to take care of their physical needs. He didn't even give them a status, and their status was only slightly higher than that of his maidservants. He had sealed the news so tightly that no one in the outside world knew about it. Even his father, the emperor, didn't know about it. Who would have thought that he would be so stupid as to be provoked by Xia Fenglu to tell the truth? Shi Shuangqing was originally a very scheming person, but even he couldn't believe that he would fall for such an obvious trick. Was there water in his brain? He glared at Xia Fenglu. You used an eye technique." Xia Fenglu shrugged and didn't deny it. "Indeed, but my eye technique only makes people speak the truth. It doesn't make people talk nonsense." "So Prince Shi Shuangqing already has 2 beautiful concubines, so you don't need to have any ideas about my senior sister. A person like my senior sister deserves the most sincere and attentive treatment from the most outstanding man. And you obviously don't qualify." Shi Shuangqing. He was unwilling to give up. He looked at Ji Shenyu, who had already boarded the luxurious carriage. This prince fell in love with Princess Shenyu at first sight. If I had known that there was someone like Princess Shenyu, this prince would have waited for this day even if he didn't touch women. "Shenyu, if you are willing, this prince is willing to scatter all the concubines around you." The veins on Ji Shenyu's forehead throbbed. Her peach blossoms seemed to have bloomed more vigorously today. Xia Fenglu directly blocked for her. "That won't do. My senior sister only likes young men. She doesn't want those who have already lost their virginity." This sentence had quite a shocking effect. Everyone looked up, dumbfounded. Shi Shuangqing's handsome face flushed slightly. "This young Master Xia's words are deliberately difficult. According to the rules of the Fanning continent, a man needs to have a woman break through the yang at the age of 800, understand human affairs, and adjust the yin and yang. How can there be young men nowadays?" "Young Master Xia's words, aren't you deliberately making things difficult?" Xia Fenglu sat at the shaft of the carriage with his legs crossed and said with a smile, "You're wrong. There are many capable young men in this world." Shi Shuangqing was unconvinced. "Who? Give me some examples." Xia Fenglu giggled and pointed his finger at himself. "I'm not talented, I'm a standard young man." He gestured with his chin towards the interior of the carriage. "My master too." Ji Xinyu, who had just helped her master into the carriage, stumbled when she heard this, and almost fell into the carriage with her master. The sect leader of the Purple Cloud sect shook his hand and threw out a walnut. "Bastard, what nonsense are you spouting? Hurry up and drive. If you miss my birthday, I'll skin you alive." The walnut almost hit the back of Xie Fengliu's head. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and caught it with his hand. He rubbed his sore fingers and complained, "Master, did you really hit me? Sooner or later, this clever disciple will be smashed into a fool by you. As your master, I hope that you'll be foolish for a while so that you don't have to spout so much nonsense and anger your master to death." The Purple Cloud sect master's cold voice rang out. He seemed to have finally remembered something as he lifted the curtain of the carriage and flicked a gilded invitation card towards Rongyu Yishenlen, who was not far away. His tone was steady as he said, "5 days later, it will be my birthday. I hope that old friend can come and meet me." He didn't wait for Rongyu Tianlan to answer and smashed another walnut on Xie Fengliu's head. "Why are you in a daze? Hurry up." "Yes, master." Xie Fengliu rubbed the back of his head and raised the golden whip in his hand. With a snap, the luxurious carriage rose into the air and flew away in the blink of an eye. Chapter 28-24. The other disciples of the Purple Cloud sect naturally rose into the air and followed. Feng Wuji was a reliable person. Before he left, he glanced at Xishuangqing and said, "Prince Xishuangqing, my junior martial sister has cut ties with the Southern Sky royal family. Her marriage will be decided by my teacher. No one else is allowed to interfere. You don't have to waste your time in the Southern Sky Palace." After saying this, he also rose into the air and chased after his master's carriage. Xishuangqing was speechless. He never expected this to be the outcome after waiting for so long. He had long heard that the disciples of the Purple Cloud sect were eccentric and mysterious, and none of them were easy to deal with. Now it seemed that it was true. For Ji Xinyu to be born in such a sect, it was no wonder that her temperament was so special, even more direct and fiery than men. Thinking of Ji Xinyu's skills and her stunning beauty, Xishuangqing felt an itch in his heart, as if it was on fire. After being rebuffed like this, his competitive spirit was stimulated. He had to ask for this marriage. Even if Xie Fengliu and sect master Ziyun were virgins, they couldn't possibly become Ji Xinyu's husband, right? Sect master Ziyun was Ji Xinyu's master, and the Fanning continent did not have a relationship between master and disciple, so sect master Ziyun could be excluded. As for this Xie Fengliu, he was just a disciple of a humble family. No matter how high his martial arts and intelligence were, he was not worthy of Ji Xinyu, who was of noble birth, right? Therefore, there was still hope for him, the favored prince of the Western Sky clan. After all, among the descendants of the 4 royal families in the Fanning continent, besides Rongyu Tianlan, Xishuang City was ranked second. Regardless of identity, status, or appearance, they were all top-notch, worthy of Ji Xinyu. As long as he obtained Ji Xinyu's heart first, everything would be fine. Right now, the most important thing was to send people back to deal with the 2 concubines, and then he would think of a way. He had already made up his mind. When he looked up, he suddenly saw that Rongyu Tianlan's car hadn't left yet. The unicorn was already impatiently pawing its 4 hooves in the air, while Rongyu Yishenlen was sitting in front of the carriage with a fan in her hand. She was looking at the misty mountain thoughtfully. As if sensing Xishuangqing's gaze, he lowered his eyes and glanced at him. This gaze was like frost and lightning, causing Xishuangqing's heart to tremble. Xishuangqing calmed himself down and cupped his fists. Her Highness Rongyu. But in his heart, he was pondering the reason why Her Highness had not left yet. But he soon found out. Because he saw two women who looked like maids rushing in from outside the valley, panting as they saluted Rongyue Tianlan's carriage. "Greetings to your highness Rongyue, Princess Tianyue." Rongyue Tianlan turned around and asked Ji Tianyue, who was standing close to the carriage, "Which maid do you want to have serve you along the way?" Ji Tianyue pouted and whispered, "Tianyue doesn't need them to serve her. She just wanted to be alone with Rongyue Tianlan and didn't want anyone else present." Rongyue Tian didn't care. Childish words. "You're a princess, what's wrong with having no one to serve you? Pick one." Ji Tianyue blurted out, "My sister is also a princess. She has never allowed anyone to serve her." Rongyue Tianlan glanced at her. "How can you compare to her?" He probably felt that this sentence was a bit harsh, so he changed his words. "You two are different. She has lived outside since she was young and is used to being independent. You, on the other hand, have been living in the palace. I'm afraid that you won't even be able to eat." "Alright, I'm doing this for your own good. Pick one, we'll be on our way." Chapter 28-25. Ji Tianyue had no choice but to choose a maid who usually spoke little and had a weak presence, and let her come up. The servant girl was naturally very excited to be able to sit in such a dreamy carriage. Her eyes shone uncontrollably, and she was so nervous that she didn't know where to put her hands and feet. Rongyue Tianlan ordered her, "Help your princess sit inside." The servant girl agreed and helped the unwilling Ji Tianyue into the carriage. A silver whip appeared in Rongyue Tianlan's palm. A circle of whip shadows flashed past, and the unicorn also flew away. Enchanting was deep in thought. His Highness Rongyue insisted on having a servant girl in the carriage. Was this to avoid the awkwardness of being alone in the carriage with Ji Tianyue? To avoid arousing suspicion? Enchanting was a Casanova, and he could guess the thoughts of others. He always felt that His Highness Rongyue's actions were a little strange, and could not be judged by common sense. His Highness Rongyue seemed to have been paying attention to his ex-fiancée Ji Xinyue's movements. When Ji Xinyue carried sect master Ziyun into the carriage, His Highness Rongyue's expression seemed a little bad, but he did not react. His Highness Rongyue's attitude towards Ji Tianyue was also a little vague. He seemed to want to treat Ji Tianyue well, but when Ji Tianyue threw a little princess tantrum, he suppressed the annoyance in his heart and coaxed her. There was even a flash of impatience between his brows, but his rationality made him impatient. His Highness Rongyue's actions were also a little contradictory. The wind was biting cold, and the clothes were cold. The contradictory Rongyue Tianlan had been sitting outside the carriage. He sat in a carefree and unrestrained manner, with one leg slightly bent and one arm propped on his leg, supporting his cheek. He was still holding the gilded invitation in his hand, but his eyes were looking forward, and there was no expression on his handsome face. There was a faint sound coming from the carriage. It was not loud, but it could not escape Rongyue Tianlan's ears. "This is Brother Rongyue's carriage. You have no right to sit in it. Stand over there. Don't come over until I call you. Aya, your shoes are too dirty. Don't dirty Brother Rongyue's carriage. Don't step on it. Don't step on it. Hey! Why are you taking off your shoes? Do you think your feet are clean? Stupid." The servant seemed to be at a loss and was about to cry, "Princess, what do you want me to do? Kneel. Kneeling in that corner. Stupid." Yes, Rongyue Tian tightened her grip on the fan. The longer he interacted with Princess Ji Tianyue, the more he couldn't help but frown. Unruly, willful, naive, but not cute at all, she clearly looked the same as Jiyu, but at first glance, she seemed to have a similar temper. But after getting to know her for a long time, this Ji Tianyu's personality was very different from Jiyu's. For example, although Ji-yu was occasionally unruly and willful, she still had a bottom line. She treated her servants very well and was very loyal. She had been traumatized by the tragic death of one of her maids. She was afraid that she would implicate her maids and did not dare to escape. And this Ji Tianyu always ordered the maids around her, not taking them seriously at all. Although the Fanning continent was also a power politics with a strict class hierarchy, and most of the nobles were not good to their servants, Rongyue Tianlan still felt disappointed when she saw Ji Tianyu like this. Another example was that Ji Yu had always been kind-hearted. She valued her family very much. Otherwise, she wouldn't have tried so hard to save her parents. For her parents, she seemed to be able to do anything. Chapter 28-26. It was also because of this that she went crazy when she saw her parents being beheaded, causing their relationship to go on a path of no return. Although Ji Tianyu was loved by the world, she was indifferent to family. She only liked to take and didn't like to give. Her parents' and sisters' love was a matter of course in her eyes, and she probably didn't even think about returning the favor. Rongyue Tianlan was still very good at judging people. He dared to bet that with Ji Tianyue's current temperament, if she encountered the same situation as Ji Yu, she wouldn't choose to sacrifice herself to save her parents. Her first thought would probably be annoyance that she was implicated by her parents. Most people's temperament would change after reincarnation. After all, their living environment was different, so their temperament would more or less change. Especially if it wasn't the reincarnation of the original soul, there was no guarantee. For example, Jun Liuye, who was reincarnated from his battle soul, had a different temperament from his original body. At least his original body didn't have any ambition to conquer the world, and he didn't agree with some of Jun Liuye's methods. He even considered that if his original body was reincarnated as Jun Liuye, he wouldn't be so heartless when dealing with his relationship with Ji Yu, and wouldn't use his beloved to achieve various political goals. Therefore, it was understandable that Ji Yu and Ji Tianyue had different temperaments. However, Rongyue Tianlan always felt that Ji Tianyue and Ji Yu were very different in nature, as if they weren't the same person. Sometimes, he even suspected that Ji Shenyu was the former Ji Yu. When he was with Ji Shenyu, he even took out her soul to take a look while she was asleep, but he couldn't see any difference between her soul and her original body. In his previous life as Jun Liuye, although his martial arts weren't bad, he didn't know any spells. He had never seen what Ji Yu's soul looked like, so he couldn't tell at all. Before he recovered the memories of that soul, he only had Ji Yu's general appearance in his mind. He thought that God had given him a good marriage and gave him a direction to look for. Therefore, when he saw Ji Tianyue, who looked like Ji Yu, he felt as if he had found a treasure and felt that he was really lucky. The Red Luan Star had sent him his sweetheart without him having to spend too much effort to find her. The heavens were indeed merciful. However, after interacting with Ji Tianyue for a while, he still couldn't find any feelings. Looking at Ji Tianyue was no different from looking at ordinary girls. At that time, he even suspected that the girl's appearance in his mind was a joke played by God to mess with his thoughts. Because in his mind, girls like Ji Tianyue were not outstanding at all. Even if he had not seen 100 girls like her in his life, he had seen at least 80. Facing Ji Tianyue wasn't even as good as facing Yunxi. Of course, his feelings towards Yunxi were that of a friend. He had never considered her as a lover. He never thought that one day he would fall in love with a girl like Ji Tianyue. In fact, he still hadn't fallen in love with her. Unknowingly, his gaze was attracted to Ji Shenyu, and he became more and more concerned about her. His thoughts revolved around her more and more, and he couldn't help but pay attention to her, and couldn't help but want to hug her. This was the first time he felt heartache for a girl. Before he recovered that melodramatic memory, he even wanted to get rid of that shadow in his mind and follow his own wishes. He wanted to get Ji Xinyu back and not cancel this engagement. There are still days. Chapter 28-27. However, just as he was about to make this decision, he recovered his memories of Ji Yu. That kind of pain, that kind of sorrow, surged in his mind, cutting his usually calm heart into pieces. It was so painful that he almost couldn't breathe. When he recovered his memories, his first thought was to never let her down again. He knew that some people might not look the same when they were reincarnated, but that would only happen when their souls were incomplete. For example, Jun Liuye, who was reincarnated from his soul, looked very different from him. However, if the other party's soul was complete, his appearance wouldn't change. At most, his personality would change due to the environment. It was impossible for two people to look so similar in this world, unless they were twins or had the same soul. Even their names were only one word apart. This definitely couldn't be explained by the word coincidence. In fact, Rongyu Tianlan had also reluctantly used the word coincidence to deduce her identity. She even took out her soul to take a look when this little girl was asleep. Her soul was the same as her body, and her face was exactly the same as Ji Yu's. Therefore, there could only be one answer: Ji Tianyue was Ji Yu. This answer was a little cruel, but Rongyu Ishanlin couldn't think of any other reason to refute this answer. Perhaps Ji Yu was also the reincarnation of Ji Xinyue's soul. But why did her reincarnation look so much like Ji Tianyue? Wasn't it too unreasonable for her to be reincarnated as a younger sister? Even if there were similarities between sisters, it shouldn't be to the extent that they looked like they were carved from the same mold, right? He looked down at the invitation and flicked it with his finger. Before he left the Sanyin continent, he and sect master Ziyun were half good friends and got along well. This sect master celebrated his birthday every year and was very happy. At that time, he also threw him an invitation every year. When he wasn't busy, he would also go there for a stroll. Of course, he wasn't busy at that time, so he only went there a dozen times in total. Now, this sect master threw him another invitation. He knew that he was used to it, but should he go this time? He knew that he had different feelings for Ji Xinyue, and his feelings had already shifted beyond his control. However, he couldn't let Ji Yu down, so he decided not to meet her for the time being. Maybe his infatuation with her was only temporary, and it would cool down after a while. After cooling down for a while, perhaps he would treat her like a normal friend, just like how he treated Yunxi. He lowered his eyes and looked at the invitation card in his hand. Then, he wouldn't go to sect leader Zi Yun's birthday this time. He exerted a little force with his fingertips, and the gilded invitation turned into butterflies in the wind. Brother Rongyue. Ji Tianyue lifted the curtain and poked her head out, but before she could finish her sentence, she was blown back by the strong wind. Because the car was traveling too fast in the air, the wind was biting cold and frightening. Ji Tianyue almost fainted from the wind. She hurriedly lowered the curtain again, but was unwilling to give up. Brother Rongyu, cough, cough, it's so windy outside, why don't you come in? No need. Rongyu Tian responded with 2 words. But the wind will hurt you. Ji Tianyue's voice was full of concern. It won't. Rongyu Tian had set up a wind barrier around his body, so the wind couldn't actually blow him. Why don't you come in and warm up first? Let Xiao Rong drive the carriage outside, okay? I'm the only one who can drive this carriage, no one else can. Rongyu Tian finally spoke a few more words. Chapter 28-28. Ji Tianyue paused and pursed her lips. Although she and big brother Rongyu returned in the same carriage, one was outside the carriage and the other was inside. She didn't know if Rongyu Tianlan had to drive the carriage, but since he said so, she could only believe him. She paused and blushed. Big brother Rongyu personally drove Tianyue back. Tianyue couldn't bear it. Big brother Rongyu is an immortal and the prince of the East Sky clan. How noble is your identity. Rongyu Tianlan was silent for a moment and said indifferently, I only do things according to my interest, I never consider identity. Was this little girl only interested in his status? If he was an ordinary person and drove the carriage here, would this little girl be so happy and uneasy? He never cared about the identity of the person he liked. As long as he liked, even if the other party was a daughter of a poor family, he would still like her. It was just that the heavens seemed to be playing a joke on him, always involving him with the princess. From Ji Tianyue's words, Rongyu Tianlan could hear her snobbishness, his fingers holding the fan tightened faintly. Back then, Ji fell in love with Yi Qianshang, and in Ji Yu's knowledge, he was just a Jianghu killer. Ji Yu had no concept of a person's identity at all. Love was love. Even if he was just a wandering assassin, she would still wait to marry him with all her heart. If she was as snobbish as Ji Tianyue now, there wouldn't be all of this later. Big brother Rongyu, I don't care about a person's identity. Seemingly aware of Rongyu Tianlan's silence, Ji Tianyue hurriedly explained. She was afraid that Rongyu Tianlan wouldn't believe her, so she hurriedly gave several examples. For example, when she saw beggars on the street, she would ask for alms, and when she ate in a restaurant, she would give tips. She said a lot of things. Rongyu Tianlan sat there, waving the folding fan in his hand and listening without interrupting. Ji Tianyue couldn't see his expression from inside the carriage, so she didn't know what he thought about what she said. She was a little nervous as she spoke. Big brother Rongyu, are you listening? Rongyu Tianlan responded, I'm listening, just say it. The more she spoke, the more he understood about her. Rongyu Tianlan was an old fox who had been in the Jianghu for a long time. He could tell which of Ji Tianyue's words were true and which were false. From her words, he could also read her inner world, her true personality and temper. Ji Tianyue and Rongyu Tianlan didn't have many chances to interact with each other. When they were together, she would try her best to cover up her shortcomings and show off her strengths, so that she could gain more points in his heart. However, she was still a child after all. Once she got excited, she would often reveal her own shortcomings. It would be better if Rongyu Tian didn't notice this, but once he started to seriously analyze her in his heart, she couldn't hide her foxtail anymore. Beautiful, naive, selfish, cold, liked to sow discord in words, liked to pretend to be innocent. This was Rongyu Tianlan's temporary evaluation of her in her heart. Perhaps she had some other problems, but Rongyu Tianlan couldn't tell from her words at the moment. If people only associate with each other on the surface, you will never discover the true character of those who are good at disguising themselves. If you really want to understand someone, you have to go through some things with her. Chapter 28-29. He thought of Ji Yu again, and found the biggest difference between them. Ji Yu was beautiful, innocent, kind, and loyal. She was brave and liked to take risks. Although she was a little reckless, she was still cute. When he thought of Ji Yu now, other than the familiar heartache, he also had the urge to hug her. Facing Ji Tianyue, who had the same face as her, he couldn't bring up the desire to be close to her. Even when she was close to him, he instinctively felt disgusted. Actually, he didn't need to drive this carriage outside. He had been sitting in this carriage all along. He didn't want to go in now because he didn't want to be alone with Ji Tianyue. Was it because he had fallen in love with Ji Xinyue, so he instinctively hated Ji Tianyue? Or was this Ji Tianyue not Ji Yu's reincarnation at all? Thinking of this last point, Rongyu Ishanlan's fingers tightened on the fan again. Brother Rongyu Ishanlan, I have a pet name in the palace. You can call me by that name. In the carriage, Ji Tianyue had already started talking about her pet name. What pet name? Rongyu Ishanlan asked casually. Little Moon. Rongyu Ishanlan's fingers trembled and the fan almost fell. Little Moon. Yes, isn't it nice? I heard that when my mother gave birth to me, she dreamed of swallowing a little moon. So father was very happy and called me Little Moon. However, he doesn't call me that in front of others because of my princess status. He only calls me that when there's no one around. You can call me that too. Ji Tianyue was excited. Rongyu Ishanlan's face turned slightly pale. Another one matched. If this was a coincidence, then there were too many coincidences in this world. But their temperaments were indeed very different. Their living environment was clearly similar. They were both little princesses who were extremely doted on by their parents. Why were their temperaments so different when they grew up? Ji Xinyue's appearance appeared in his mind again, and his heart suddenly ached. When they were in the scroll of the universe, he had clearly felt that she had fallen in love with him. Although that girl hid it well, she couldn't hide it from an old fox like him. Now that this marriage had been cancelled, would she be very sad? Would she be sad when she couldn't sleep at night? Would she also think of him? In fact, Ji Xinyu didn't even have time to be sad. She was so busy that she was about to go crazy. Sect Master Ziyun probably wanted to find some balance, so he handed over all the preparations for his birthday to Ji Xinyu. He gave her all the authority, and she could command all the disciples as she wished, including her senior and junior brothers. Grandmaster Ziyun was waiting for his disciple to give him a big surprise. Ji Xinyu actually had a headache. In the past, these things were all handled by her senior brother, and she was just a small errand boy. Now that she was suddenly asked to take on the responsibility, she felt a little pressured. Grandmaster Ziyun was a very fussy person. He had to come up with something new for his birthday every year. Otherwise, he would be unhappy for a year and give his disciples a hard time for a year. However, he celebrated his birthday every year, and after so many years, he had almost gone through all the tricks. How could it be easy to come up with new tricks? Feng Wuji had been troubled by this issue for a long time, but now that he had finally gotten rid of it, he was relieved. The gratified eldest senior brother patted Ji Xinyu's shoulder and cheered her on, telling her to do well. Ji Xinyu felt the veins on her forehead throbbing. Time was tight and the mission was important. Ever since Ji Xinyue returned, she had been so busy that her feet barely touched the ground. You're tuning into the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.